Wings to Awakening, translated by Bhikkhu Thanissaro or Geoffrey de Graaf, Part 2. A. First I'll read the contents. Contents are the treasures of the teaching, the 4 frames of reference, the 4 right exertions, the 4 bases of power, the 5 faculties, the 5 strengths, the 7 factors for awakening, the Noble Eightfold Path. So, A. The treasures of the teaching. So first, the commentary. Nowhere in the canon does the Buddha list the 7 sets of teachings under the name of Wings to Awakening. He mentions the 7 sets as a group many times when he is summarizing his main teachings, but there is no firm evidence as to whether he ever actually gave a name to the group. In one passage, he applies the term wings to self-awakening to the 5 faculties, and in 2 passages he makes reference to the 7 wings to awakening, which may or may not denote the 7 sets. Nevertheless, given the fact that the Buddha called the 5 faculties wings to self-awakening and all 7 sets are equivalent to the 5 faculties, the name wings to awakening for all 7 seems appropriate. This was the name that they definitely had in early post-canonical texts, such as the Petakopadisa, and that they have maintained ever since. The 7 sets have played an important role throughout the history of Buddhism in all of its various branches. They provided the framework for the earliest Abhidhamma texts, systematic presentations of the doctrine that were added to the early canons a few centuries after the Buddha's passing away. They were also part of the first Buddhist text translated into Chinese, which later came to exemplify Hinayana teachings in the Taing Dai and other Chinese doctrinal systems. Tantric Buddhism features mandalas containing 37 deities, symbolic of the 37 factors making up the 7 sets. Tibetan architecture, probably following the treatises of the medieval Indian universities, identifies the various parts of standard stupa design as a symbol of 7 sets. Thus the wings provides one of the few common threads that, in actual or symbolic form, run throughout all the traditions claiming descent from the Buddha. One of the particularities of the wings, viewed as a whole, is that 2 sets are duplicates. The 5 faculties and the 5 strengths contain the same 5 factors. Several theories have been advanced as to why the Buddha included what is essentially the same set twice. One is that he wanted to indicate that the 5 factors that make up each set could exist in the mind in 2 distinct levels of intensity, one sufficient for the path to stream entry, the first level of awakening, and the other needed for arhatship, the highest level. This may parallel the passage where the Buddha makes a similar distinction between the Noble Eightfold Path of stream entry and the Tenfold Path of arhatship. There is some disagreement among latter writers as to which of the 2 sets, the faculties or the strengths, should be considered the more intense, although there is one canonical passage where the term faculty seems to rank on a higher level than strength. Another hypothesis, not necessarily at odds with the first, is that the Buddha wanted the number of factors to total 37 because the number had symbolic meaning. In ancient times, before the development of the decimal system, multiplication tables were arranged in hexagonal patterns. The complete table used to calculate the ratio used in tuning musical instruments to reciprocal scales that played the same notes going up and going down, had one member in the middle surrounded by 3 hexagonal rings containing, in ascending order, 6, 12, and 18 members, giving a total of 37 members. See the diagram on the back cover of the book. The table of whole number ratios that formed the basis for trigonometry, and thus for the study of astronomy, contained 37 members. Thus the number 37 carried connotations of basic completeness. This principle is at work in Plato's Laws, where the ideal city has 37 guardians, and it may also be at work here. A related consideration may be that the numbers 7 in the 7 sets was a symbolic of treasure. The universal monarch was said to have 7 treasures that formed his spontaneous regalia, and noble wealth consisted of 7 qualities. The Buddha explicitly borrowed this number symbolism when he states that the 7 sets are the treasures of his teaching. Another possibility, which we have already noted, is that musicians in the Buddha's time recognized 7 systems for tuning the musical scale, although their systems being rejected as discordant. And the Buddha may have borrowed this numerical symbolism to suggest that his teachings formed a complete guide to all the possible ways in which a sama, a great person in tune, sama, could tune his or her mind to the truth. From a less historical and more practical point of view, the more important question about the 7 sets is how they fit into the general plane of Buddhist practice. Their role is most succinctly stated in Section 25. The development of the 7 sets follows on the development of virtue and leads naturally to the development of transcendent discernment, thus filling the role that other passages assign to concentration practice. This suggests, and again the suggestion is borne out by passages that deal with the issue in more detail, that the 7 sets are to be developed in the course of a concentration practice based on a moral life and aimed at the development of discernment. When Section 23 ends its list of preconditions for the practice of the 7 sets with 4 meditation practices, actually 3, as the perception of inconstancy is an integral part of mindfulness of in and out breathing. It is simply listing the concentration practices most frequently recommended in the text as focal points for developing the skills of the 7 sets. Nevertheless, although the 7 sets focus most specifically on the practice of concentration, the close interconnection among virtue, concentration, and discernment mean that the sets include the factors of virtue and discernment as well, thus encompassing the entire path of Buddhist practice. A virtuous and moral life is an absolute prerequisite for practicing the sets. This is a point that cannot be overstated, a fact reflected in the large number of canonical passages that hammer it home, far too many to include in this analogy. Some of the sets, the 5 faculties, strengths, and the Noble Eightfold Path, actually include the practice of a virtual life in their factors under the faculty strength of conviction and under the factors of right speech, right action, and right livelihood in the Eightfold Path. The remaining sets, the texts tell us, are meant to follow on the development of personal virtue in the same way that the sunrise follows on the pre-dawn colors in the eastern sky. The text explains the precepts that underline a virtuous life, not as rules imposed by an outside authority, but as guidelines for an action that a person who voluntarily undertakes when accepting the importance of the principles of karma and the skillful action in shaping the course of one's experience. Killing, for instance, is obviously an unskillful action when viewed in the full light of karmic consequences. The same holds true with other acts forbidden by the precepts, such as drinking alcohol, stealing, illicit sex, lying, and abusive language. For a more complete list, see sections 103 to 104. Passage 103 shows that the Buddha's teachings on virtue consist not only of the don'ts of the precepts, but also the do's of such positive standards as sympathy, reliability, and genuine helpfulness. Skillfulness is not simply a matter of avoiding bad consequences, it's also actively cultivating the good. In keeping with the teachings that karma is essentially intention, the precepts are designed to focus on the state of mind motivating the act. A precept is broken only when one does so intentionally. Thus, the practice of observing the precepts requires constant attention to the factor of intention of one's. Sorry, I'm going to start over there. Thus, the practice of observing the precepts requires constant attention to the factors of intention in one's action. It also requires that one develop the sublime attitudes, Brahma Vihara, of goodwill, compassion, empathetic joy, and equanimity, which strengthen one's ability to side with skillful intentions. In this way, the Buddha's approach to morality is to use the realm of personal action as an arena for the comprehensive training of the mind. These 3 aspects of the Buddhist approach to morality the avoidance of bad karma, the development of skillful mental states, and the purification of intention, follow the pattern of the heart of the Buddha's teachings as presented in the first verse of section 7. They also explain why virtue is a necessary foundation for the principle of concentration. A moral life brings about absence of remorse. People who, in all honesty, have no reason for remorse over their actions or for anxiety over the consequences of their actions feel a natural sense of inner joy. This joy is intensified when they reflect on the positive acts of their kindness and generosity that they have performed for others. Thus intensified, this joy then provides the basis for the inner pleasure that allows for concentration. In this way, a healthy sense of self-worth is a necessary precondition of a stable mind. In addition, the practice of virtue forces one to develop a number of the concentration factors in the sets themselves on a preliminary level of skill, thus making them strong and fit for formal concentration practice. To maintain a precept, one must keep it constantly in mind. This strengthens mindfulness. One must stick to one's determination to abide by one's principles. This strengthens persistence. One must pay attention to the present moment, for that is where the decision to keep or break a precept is made, and one must remain firm in one's cultivation of the sublime attitudes. These factors strengthen concentration. One must be clear about one's motives for acting, and at the same time be sensitive in knowing how to apply a particular precept to one's particular situation, e.g., being quick to see how to avoid an issue in which telling the truth might be harmful, yet without telling a lie. This strengthens one's ability to analyze the mind in the present moment, intensifying one's powers of discernment in general. These 4 factors, mindfulness, effort, concentration, and discernment, are the central elements in all of the 7 sets. Thus, the practice of virtue exists on a rudimentary level, the qualities of mind needed for concentration practice. A close look at the 7 sets will show us that a similar relationship exists between these qualities as they are developed in concentration practice and the transcendent discernment towards which they lead. On the one hand, concentration is needed as a basis for a discernment. On the other hand, discernment is exercised in developing concentration, becoming more precise and penetrating as a result. To understand how this happens, we must first note that the 7 sets fall into 2 types. The first type consists of the 4 frames of reference, the 4 right exertions, and the 4 bases of power. Each of these sets focuses on a single factor in the concentration aggregate of the Noble Eightfold Path. The frames of reference on mindfulness, the right exertion of effort, and the base of power on concentration. The factors are defined in such a way that the proper development of any one set involves the other 2 sets, together with a factor of a discernment. In this sense, they point out the holographic nature of the path. Each part must include the whole, just as every piece of a hologram can reproduce the entire holographic image. The sets included in the second type are the 5 faculties, the 5 strengths, the 7 factors for awakening, and the Noble Eightfold Path. Each of these sets lists its factors in a causal chain progressing through a spiraling loop. The 5 faculties and strengths start with conviction, which then lead naturally to persistence, mindfulness, concentration, and then to discernment. Discernment, in turn, provides as a basis for even firmer conviction. Similarly, the 7 factors for awakening start with mindfulness, which develops into an analysis of present mental qualities, persistence, rapture, serenity, concentration, and finally, equanimity. Equanimity, in turn, provides a steady basis for the further development of mindfulness. The Noble Eightfold Path starts with right view and right resolve, which later constitute discernment, leading to right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Concentration, in turn, forms a basis for the clear development of discernment. In this way, the various factors of the path are mutually reinforcing in an upward spiral that leads to awakening. Comparing the sets in the second type with one another, however, we find a certain complexity in their feedback loops. In terms of their most important factors, we see that the faculties and strengths depict causal sequence as effort, goes to mindfulness, which goes to concentration, which goes to discernment. The factors for awakening give it as mindfulness goes to discernment, goes to effort, goes to concentration. And the Noble Eightfold Path, discernment goes to effort, goes to mindfulness, goes to concentration. Although the sequence is different, they have one pattern in common. Concentration always follows right after right effort and mindfulness. This suggests not only that concentration depends on these two factors, but also that effort and mindfulness, when properly developed, are meant to lead to concentration. This suggestion is borne out in the texts that deal with these factors in detail. The two factors with the most variegated roles in these lists are mindfulness and discernment. Mindfulness is essential at every step along the way. There are passages teaching that mindfulness is a prerequisite for virtue, which, together with right view, is in turn a prerequisite to right mindfulness. Similarly, mindfulness is necessary for concentration, which in turn can be devoted to the development of greater mindfulness, which can lead to further discernment. As for discernment, if we look at the lists placing discernment after the other factors, we find that certain aspects of discernment are presumed by the earlier factors. In the first five faculties, for instance, conviction includes belief in the principle of karma, which is one of the elements of right discernment. In the lists that place discernment toward the beginning of the process, we find transcendent discernment added on at the end. The seven factors for awakening, when fully developed, lead to clear knowing, transcendent discernment, and release. When the Noble Eightfold Path reaches the point of full awakening, it leads to right knowledge, transcendent discernment again, and right release. The implication here is that discernment, functioning on different levels, keeps adding feedback loops of ever greater sensitivity every step along the way. This point is made explicitly in section 106. For this reason, skillfulness as a constant sensitive mindfulness and discernment towards one's own actions lies at the essence of every moment in the continued development of the path. On the one hand, it creates the conditions necessary for the path to develop. Knowledge of what is skillful and unskillful must necessarily precede right effort and mindfulness, and must help mindfulness lead to concentration. On the other hand, the factors of mindfulness and concentration are necessary for discernment to become even more sensitive to the present moment. Thus, as the path spirals through its many feedback loops, it exercises discernment, making it stronger in the same way that muscles are strengthened with exercise. At the same time, the development of the path studies the conditions that provide discernment with the solid basis it needs to become more and more precise, just as a solid foundation is necessary for sensitive measuring equipment. In this way, discernment develops from a knowledge of what is skillful and unskillful, first gained through the advice and example of others, on through a more intuitive understanding of skillfulness, and gained through repeated action and reflection of one's actions, to a knowledge in terms of the Four Noble Truths and the duties appropriate to each, and finally to the knowledge that those duties have been fulfilled. The wings thus put mundane discernment to use, and in doing so make it transcendent. All of this explains why the Buddha said that of all the wings to awakening, discernment is chief. In its more rudimentary form, it provides the conditions and feedback necessary for each step along the way. Its transcendent form, at the culmination of the path, leads directly to awakening. The experience of awakening, according to the text, can take any one of four levels. Stream entry, i.e., entry into the stream leading to unbinding, which cuts the fetters of self-identity views, uncertainty, and grasping at habits and practices, ensuring that one will be reborn no more than 7 more times. 2. Once returning, which further weakens passion, aversion, and delusion, ensuring that one will be reborn no more than once. 3. non-returning, which cuts the fetters of sensual passion and irritation, ensuring that one will be reborn in the highest heavens, called the pure abodes, there to obtain unbinding, and never to return to the world, and for arhatship, which cuts the fetters of passion from passion for form, passion for formlessness, conceit, restlessness, and ignorance, bringing total freedom from the cycle of rebirth. In all four levels, the basic dynamic is the same. Virtue, concentration, and discernment bring the mind skillfully to a state of non-fashioning, atamayata, where all present input into the cycle of karma is suspended. This state of non-fashioning then opens the way for the experience of the unfabricated. To put this in terms of the two knowledges that constitute awakening, the skillful mastery of the process of karma to the point of non-fashioning corresponds to the knowledge of the regularity of the Dhamma. The experience of the unfabricated corresponds to the knowledge of unbinding. Although all four levels require mature levels of the path factors of virtue, concentration, and discernment to bring about the two knowledges that constitute awakening, they differ in the relative maturity of the path factors that lead up to them. Stream entry occurs at the full maturation of virtue, non-returning at the full maturation of concentration, arahatship at the full maturation of discernment. Thus, they also differ in the depth to which they penetrate the two knowledges of awakening, and in their ability to cut the fetters that perpetuate bondage to the cycle of karma and rebirth. The texts report a few cases where meditators go straight through all four levels to the level of arahatship, but in most cases the meditator will pass through the four levels step by step, sometimes over a course of many years or even several lifetimes. In this book, except where otherwise noted, discussions of the awakening experience are, as described in the discourses, focus on the levels where virtue, concentration, and discernment are fully mature, the total awakening, and the resulting freedom absolutely unlimited. This is the point where all 7 sets of the wings to awaken ultimately aim. So now we have the canon. Passages from the Pali Canon. 18. Pahadrada. Just as the ocean has these many treasures of various kinds, pearls, sapphires, lapis lazuli, shells, quartz, coral, silver, gold, rubies, and cat's eyes. In the same way, this doctrine and discipline has these many treasures of various kinds: the 4 frames of reference, the 4 right exertions, the 4 bases of power, the 5 faculties, the 5 strengths, the 7 factors for awakening, the Noble Eightfold Path. This is the 7th wonder and marvel, that the monks, having seen again and again in this doctrine and discipline, delight in. 19. Then, after relinquishing the will to continue fabricating his life process, the Blessed One went to the audience hall and on arrival sat down on the seat prepared for him. When he was seated, he addressed the monks. Quote, "The qualities I have pointed out, having known them directly, you should grasp them thoroughly, cultivate them, and develop them, and pursue them, so that this holy life may long endure and remain steadfast for the benefit, welfare, and happiness of the multitude, out of sympathy for the world, for the benefit, welfare, and happiness of human and celestial beings." And what are those qualities? The 4 frames of reference, the 4 right exertions, the 4 bases of power, the 5 faculties, the 5 strengths, the 7 factors for awakening, the Noble Eightfold Path. These are the qualities I have pointed out, having known them directly, that you should grasp thoroughly, cultivate, and develop and pursue for the benefit and welfare of happiness of humans and celestial beings. Then the Blessed One addressed the monks. I exhort you, monks. All fabrications are subject to decay. Bring about completion by means of heedfulness. It will not be long before the Tathaga's total unbinding. He will attain total unbinding in 3 months' time. That is what the Blessed One said. Then he said, further, young and old, wise and foolish, rich and poor, all end up dying. As the potter's clay vessels, large and small, fired and unfired, all end up broken, so too life's heeds to death. Then the Master said further, Write my age, little the life remaining to me. Leaving you I will go, having made a refuge for myself. Be heedful, monks, mindful, virtuous, with your resolve well concentrated. Look after your minds. He who in this doctrine and discipline remains heedful, leaving the round of birth, will make an end of stress. Section 20. Suppose a hen has 8, 10, or 12 eggs. If she doesn't cover them rightly, warm them rightly, or incubate them rightly, then even though this wish may occur to her, oh, that my chicks might break through the eggshells with their spiked claws or beaks and hatch out safely. Still, it is not possible that the chicks will break through the eggshells with their spiked claws or beaks and hatch out safely. Why is that? Because the hen has not covered them rightly, warmed them rightly, or incubated them rightly. In the same way, even though this wish may occur to a monk who dwells without devoting himself to development, oh, that my mind might be released from affluence through lack of clinging. Still, his mind is not released from the affluence through lack of clinging. Why is that? From lack of development, it should be said. Lack of developing what? The 4 frames of reference, the 4 right exertions, the 4 bases of power, the 5 faculties, the 5 strengths, the 7 factors for awakening, the Noble Eightfold Path. But suppose a hen has 8, 10, or 12 eggs that she covers rightly, warms rightly, and incubates rightly. Even though this wish may not occur to her, oh, that my chicks might break through the eggshells with their spiked claws or beaks and hatch out safely. Still, it is possible that the chicks will break through the eggshells with their spiked claws or beaks and hatch out safely. Why is that? Because the hen has covered them, warmed them, and incubated them rightly. In the same way, even though this wish may not occur to a monk who dwells devoting himself to development, oh, that my mind might be released from affluence through lack of clinging. Still, his mind is released from the affluence through lack of clinging. Why is that? From developing, it should be said. Developing what? The 4 frames of reference. The 4 right exertions, the 4 bases of power, the 5 faculties, the 5 strengths, the 7 factors for awakening, the Noble Eightfold Path. Just as when a carpenter or carpenter's apprentice sees the marks of his fingers or thumbs on the handle of his adze, ADZE, but does not know, today my adze handle wore down this much, yesterday it wore down that much, or the day before it wore down this much. Still he knows it is worn through when it is worn through. In the same way, when a monk dwells devoting himself to development, he does not know, today my affluence wore down this much, or yesterday they wore down that much, or the day before yesterday they wore down this much. But he still knows they are worn through when they are worn through. Just as when an ocean-going ship rigged with masts and stays after 6 months on the water is left on shore for the winter, it stays, weathered by heat and wind, moistened by the clouds of the rainy season, easily wither and rot away. In the same way a monk dwells devoting himself to development. His fetters easily wither and rot away. Section 21. A certain monk went to his preceptor, and on arrival said to him, My body, sir, now feels like it's drugged. I've lost my bearings. Things are unclear to me. Sloth and drowsiness surround my mind at all times. I am unhappy in leading this holy life. I have doubts about mental qualities or things, dhammas. Then the preceptor, taking his student, went to see the Buddha and told him what his student had said. The Buddha replied, "That's the way it is for a person who doesn't guard the doors to his sense faculties, who doesn't know moderation in eating, who isn't devoted to wakefulness, who doesn't clearly understand skillful qualities, and who isn't devoted day after day to the development of the wings to awakening. Thus you should train yourself, monk. I will guard my senses, will know moderation in eating, will devote myself to wakefulness, will clearly understand skillful qualities, and will devote myself day after day to the development of the wings to awakening. That's how you should train yourself." Then the monk, having received this instruction from the Blessed One, got up from his seat, bowed down, circled around the Blessed One, keeping him on his right, and then went away. Dwelling alone, secluded, heedful, ardent, and resolute, he in no long time reached and remained in the supreme goal of the holy life, for which clansmen rightly go forth from home into homelessness, knowing it and realizing it for himself in the here and now. He knew, birth is ended, the holy life fulfilled, the task done, there is nothing further for the sake of this world. And thus he became another one of the Arahats. Section 22. Endowed with three qualities, a monk is one who follows the way that cannot be faulted, and he has aroused the basis for ending the affluence. Which three? There is the case where a monk guards the door to his sense faculties, knows moderation in eating, and is devoted to wakefulness. And how does a monk guard the doors to his sense faculties? There is the case where a monk, on seeing a form with the eye, does not grasp at any theme or variance by which, if he were to dwell without restraint over the faculty of the eye, evil, unskillful qualities such as greed or distress might assail him. He practices with restraint. He guards the faculty of the eye. He achieves restraint with regard to the faculty of the eye. Similarly with an ear, nose, tongue, body, and intellect. This is how a monk guards the doors to his sense faculties. And how does a monk know moderation in eating? This is the case where a monk, considering it appropriately, takes his food not playfully, nor for intoxication, nor for putting on bulk, nor for beautification, but simply for the survival and continuance of this body, for ending its afflictions, for the support of the holy life, thinking, I will destroy old feelings of hunger and not create new feelings from overeating. Thus I will maintain myself, be blameless, and live in comfort. This is how a monk knows moderation in eating. And how is a monk devoted to wakefulness? There is the case where a monk during the day, sitting and pacing back and forth, cleanses his mind of any qualities that would hold the mind in check. During the first watch of the night, dusk to 10 p.m., sitting and pacing back and forth, he cleanses his mind of any qualities that would hold the mind in check. During the second watch of the night, 10 p.m. to 2 a.m., reclining on his right side, he takes up the lion's posture, one foot placed on top of the other, mindful, alert, and his mind set on getting up, either as soon as he awakens or at a particular time. During the last watch of the night, 2 a.m. to dawn, sitting and pacing back and forth, he cleanses his mind of any qualities that would hold the mind in check. This is how a monk is devoted to wakefulness. Endowed with these three qualities, a monk is one who follows the way that cannot be faulted, and he has aroused the basis for ending the affluence. 23. Monks, if wanderers who are members of other sects should ask you, what, friend, are the prerequisites for the development of the wings to awakening? You should answer, there is the case where a monk has admirable people as friends, companions, and colleagues. This is the first prerequisite to the development of the wings to self-awakening. Furthermore, the monk is virtuous. He dwells restrained in accordance with the patimokkha, consummate in his behavior and sphere of activity. He trains himself, having undertaken the training rules, sees danger in the slightest faults. This is the second prerequisite for the development to the wings of self-awakening. Furthermore, he gets to hear at will, easily and without difficulty, talk that is truly sobering and conducive to the opening of awareness, i.e., talk on having few wants, on contentment, on seclusion, on non-entanglement, on arousing persistence, on virtue, on concentration, on discernment, on release, and on the knowing and vision of release. This is the third prerequisite for the development of the wings to awakening. Furthermore, he keeps his persistence aroused for abandoning unskillful mental qualities and for taking on skillful mental qualities. He is steadfast, solid in his effort, not shirking his duties with regard to skillful mental qualities. This is the fourth prerequisite to the development of the wings of awakening, or the wings to self-awakening. Furthermore, he is discerning, endowed with the discernment of arousing and passing away, noble, penetrating, leading to the right ending of stress. This is the fifth prerequisite for the development to the wings of self-awakening. Monks. When a monk has admirable people as friends, companions, and colleagues, it is to be expected he will be virtuous, will dwell restrained in accordance with the patimokkha, consummate in his behavior and sphere of activity, and will train himself, having undertaken the training rules, seeing danger in the slightest faults. When a monk has admirable people as friends, companions, and colleagues, it is to be expected that he will get to hear at will, easily and without difficulty, talk that is truly sobering and conducive to the opening of awareness, i.e., talk on having few wants, on contentment, on seclusion, on non-entanglement, on arousing persistence, on virtue, on concentration, on discernment, on release, and on the knowledge and vision of release. That he will keep his persistence aroused for abandoning unskillful mental qualities and for taking on skillful mental qualities, steadfast, solid in his effort, not shirking his duties with regard to skillful qualities. That he will be discerning, endowed with discernment of arising and passing away, noble, penetrating, leading to the right ending of stress. And furthermore, monks, when the monk is established in these five qualities, there are four additional qualities he should develop. He should develop contemplation of the unattractive, so as to abandon lust. He should develop goodwill, so as to abandon ill will. He should develop mindfulness of in and out breathing, so as to cut off distractive thinking. He should develop the perception of inconstancy, so as to uproot the conceit, I am. For a monk perceiving inconstancy, the perception of not self is made firm. One perceiving not self attains the uprooting of the conceit, I am, unbinding it in the here and now. 24. These three divine sounds sound forth among the devas on appropriate occasion. Which three? When a disciple of the noble ones, shaving off his hair and beard, clothing himself in the ochre robes, makes up his mind to go forth from the home life into homelessness. On that occasion the divine sound sounds forth among the devas. This disciple of the noble ones has made up his mind to do battle with Mara. When a disciple of the noble ones lives engaged in developing the 7 sets of qualities that are wings to awakening, on that occasion the divine sound sounds forth among the devas. This disciple of the noble ones is doing battle with Mara. When a disciple of the noble ones, through the ending of effluence, dwells in the effluent-free awareness, release, and discernment release, knowing and realizing it for himself in the here and now, on that occasion the divine sound sounds forth among the devas. This disciple of the noble ones has won the battle, Having been in the front lines of the battle, he now dwells victorious. These are the three divine sounds that sound forth among the devas on appropriate occasions. 25. A monk who has admirable virtue, admirable qualities, and admirable discernment is called, in this doctrine and discipline, one who is complete, fulfilled, and supreme among men. And how is a monk a person with admirable virtue? There is the case where a monk is virtuous. He dwells restrained in accordance with the Patimokkha, consummate in his behavior and sphere of activity. He trains himself, having undertaken the training rules, seeing danger in the slightest faults. In this way a monk is a person with admirable virtue. Thus he is of admirable virtue. And how is a monk a person with admirable qualities? There is the case where a monk lives engaged in developing of the 7 sets of qualities that are the wings to awakening. In this way a monk is a person with admirable qualities. Thus he is of admirable virtue and admirable qualities. And how is a monk a person with admirable discernment? There is the case where a monk, through the ending of effluence, dwells in the effluent free awareness release and discernment release, knowing and realizing it for himself in the here and now. In this way a monk is a person with admirable discernment. Thus he is of admirable virtue, admirable qualities, admirable discernment. In this doctrine and discipline he is called one who is complete, fulfilled, supreme among men. One devoid of wrongdoing is in thought, word, or deed. He is called a person of admirable virtue, the monk conscientious, well developed in the qualities that go to the attainment of self-awakening. He is called a person of admirable qualities, the monk unassuming, discerning right here for himself, in himself, the ending of stress. He is called a person of admirable discernment, the monk without effluent, consummate in these things, untroubled, with doubt cut away, unattached in all the world, is called one who has abandoned the all. B. The 4 frames of reference. The 4 frames of reference, satipatthana, are a set of teachings that shows where a meditator should focus attention and how. This dual role, the where and the how, is reflected in the fact that the term satipatthana can be explained etymologically in 2 ways. On the one hand, it can be regarded as a compound of sati, mindfulness, reference, the ability to keep something in mind, and patthana, foundation, condition, source. Thus, referring to the object kept in mind as the frame of reference for giving context to one's experience. Alternatively, satipatthana can be seen as a compound of sati and upatthana, establishing near, sitting near, thus referring to the approach, the how, of keeping something closely in mind, of establishing and maintaining a solid frame of reference. Scholars are divided as to which interpretation is right, but for all practical purposes they both are. The Buddha was more a poet than a strict etymologist, and he may have deliberately chosen an ambiguous term that would have fruitful meaning on more than one level. In the practice of the frames of reference, both the proper object and the proper approach are critical for getting the proper results. In fact, as we shall see, the taking of a proper object entails the beginning of the proper approach, and the approach ends by taking it as its objects the qualities of mind developed in the course of pursuing the approach itself. In other words, as we mentioned in the introduction concerning the Buddha's awakening, the what merges with the how, as the how of the investigation ultimately becomes what gets investigated. The texts give us 2 different pictures of the role that is framed of the role that the frames of reference play in the practice. Some state developing the frames of reference is a precondition for jhana, which then forms a basis for transcendent discernment. Others make no mention of jhana, stating that one goes directly from the frames of reference to the transcendent. On the surface, that would seem to indicate that there are two alternative paths, one with and one without jhana. This reading, though, contradicts the many passages maintaining that jhana is necessary for the development of transcendent discernment. Some of these passages simply say concentration instead of jhana, but there seems to be every reason to assume that concentration here means right concentration, which is nothing other than jhana. Thus we must look for an alternative reading, and we find one suggested by passages indicating that the development of the frames of reference implicitly entails the full development of the 7 factors for awakening. Because these factors are closely associated with jhana, this would indicate that the proper development of the frames of reference necessarily incorporates in and of itself the practice of jhana. This reading is confirmed by section 29, which states that the way to develop the frames of reference is through the Noble Eightfold Path, which includes jhana. It is also confirmed in section 31, which describes how the frames of reference relate to the 16 steps of breath meditation. As we shall see in part 3e, I think it means, these 16 steps are also a description of how jhana is developed and then used as a vehicle for fostering discernment and ending the influence of the mind. Thus, we can view the outline of frames of reference practice as a description of the stages in the mindful mastery of jhana and its application to the ending of the influence. The proper objects that act as frames of reference are 4: the body in and of itself, feelings in and of themselves, the mind in and of itself, and mental qualities in and of themselves. The in and of itself here is important. To take the body as a frame of reference in this way, for instance, means that one views it not in terms of its functions in the world, for then the world would be the frame of reference, but simply on its own terms as it is directly experienced. In other words, one is not concerned with its relative worth or utility in terms of the values of the world, its beauty, strength, agility, etc., but simply how it appears when regarded in and of itself. The 4 objects that act as frames of reference fall into 2 classes. The first class, the body, feelings, and the mind, act as the given objects of meditation practice. What experience presents on its own as an object for meditation, the meditator takes any one of these objects as a frame of reference, relating all of the experience to her or his chosen frame. For example, although one will experience feelings and mind states in the course of taking the body as a frame of reference, one tries to relate them to the experience of the body as their primary frame. A feeling is viewed as it affects the body, or the body affects it. The same holds for a mind state. An analogy for this practice is holding an object in one's hand. When other objects come into contact with the hand, one is aware that they are making contact, but one does not let go of the object in one's hand in order to grasp after them. The second class of objects, mental qualities, Dhamma, denotes the qualities of mind that are developed and abandoned as one masters the meditation. The list of Dhammas given in section 30 would seem to belie the translation mental qualities here, as they include not only the 5 hindrances and 7 factors for awakening, which are obviously mental qualities, but also the 5 aggregates, the 6 sense media, and the 4 noble truths, which would seem to fit better with another meaning of the word Dhamma, i.e. phenomena. However, if we look more closely at each of these other classes, we will see that they actually deal with variant forms of abandoning the hindrances and developing the factors of awakening. The section on the sense media focuses less on media than on abandoning the fetters, passion, and delight associated with the media. The section on the aggregates describes as a state of practice that is elsewhere identified as developed form of concentration in which the aggregates that comprise the state of jhana form the object of analysis. The section on the Noble Truths describes a state of practice that elsewhere is said to require the sort of mental stability and clarity found only in jhana. Thus, all the approaches to dhammas in and of themselves would appear to be variants on the abandoning of the hindrances and the development of the factors of awakening. Because the stated function of the frames of reference is to bring about the culmination of the factors for awakening, and through them the development of clear knowing and release, the translation of Dhamma as mental quality seems an appropriate way to keep the function in mind and to avoid getting lost in the details of the different aspects. There is historical support for this interpretation as well. The Vabhanga, an ancient Abhidhamma text, includes only the hindrances and the factors for awakening in its discussion of this heading. The same holds true in the Sarvastivadin version of this discourse, preserved in Chinese tradition. Scholars have questioned whether these two texts should be taken as evidence that the original discussion of Dhamma here included only these two topics. The issue is impossible to decide from the texts available to us, but a case can be made for concluding that, regardless of what the original version may have been, the early tradition regarded the abandoning of the hindrances and the development of the factors of awakening as encompassing all the factors that might be included under this heading. Each of the four objects of mindfulness is said to be sufficient for bringing about awakening. This point is easily understood if we look at the approach taken to each of the objects, for then it becomes clear that the approach ultimately involves the development of mental qualities in and of themselves, regardless of what object is first taken up for meditation. The approach falls into three stages. The first stage, here taking the body as an example, is simply called the frame of reference. Quote, "There is the case where a monk remains focused on the body in and of itself, ardent, alert, and mindful, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world." End quote. Four terms in this passage are key. Remaining focused. Anupasan can also be translated as keeping track. This denotes the element of concentration in the practice, as one tries to stay with one particular theme in the midst of the welter of experience. Ardent, atapi, denotes the factor of effort or exertion in the practice. The commentary equates this with right exertion, which contains an element of discernment in its ability to distinguish skillful from unskillful mental qualities. Alert, sampajano, means being clearly aware of what is happening in the present. This too relates to discernment. Mindful, satima, literally means being able to remember or recollect. Here it means keeping one's task in mind. The task is a dual one, remaining focused on one's frame of reference and putting aside the distraction of greed and distress that would come from shifting one's frame of reference back to the world. In other words, one tries to stay with the phenomenology of immediate experience without slipping back into the narratives and world's views that make up one's sense of the world. In essence, this is a concentration practice with the three qualities of ardency, alertness, and mindfulness devoted to attaining concentration. Mindfulness keeps the theme of the meditation in mind. Alertness observes the theme as it is present to awareness, and also is aware of when the mind has slipped from its theme. The mindfulness then remembers where the mind should be focused, and ardency tries to return the mind to its proper theme, and to keep it there as quickly and as skillfully as possible. In this way, these three qualities help to seclude the mind from sensual preoccupations and unskillful mental qualities, thus bringing it to the first jhana. Section 33 confirms this reading by equating the successful performance of the first stage in the practice with the first jhana, whereas sections 35 through 36 give advice on how to bring the mind to concentration if this method does not work. Focus on the problem of the mind's not settling down and bringing the mind to an inspiring theme that will accomplish the desired end. When the method does not work, section 33 describes the next step as a variant of the basic exercise. Quote, remain focused on the body in and of itself, but do not think any thoughts connected with the body. End quote. That, it says, takes the mind to the second jhana, where directed thoughts and evaluations are abandoned. From there, the mind can go up to the third jhana and the fourth. These points may be illustrated with some meditation techniques that are currently popular in the West. In a mental noting practice, mindfulness is a matter of remembering to keep up the noting. Alertness means seeing whatever phenomena arise to be noted, and ardency is a matter of sticking with the noting relentlessly and being ever more quick and precise to one's alertness. In terms of the factors constituting jhana practice, the mindfulness and alertness here would be related to directed thought, ardency to singleness of preoccupation, while alertness aimed at the evaluating the results of the noting, and ardency in keeping with the pressure of the noting just right would be related to evaluation. If this practice is then conducted in line with the texts, it should reach a stage where the mind settles down into the singleness of the first jhana. Then the meditator would be encouraged to stop the noting so that the mind could engage in the subtler mindfulness and alertness leading to the second jhana. In a scanning or body sweep practice, mindfulness means remembering to stick with the process of scanning the body while alertness would mean seeing the subtle sensation of the body being scanned. Ardency would mean sticking with the scanning process and trying to be ever more sensitive to the subtlest sensations. As in the previous case, these activities are related to the factors of jhana, and the process, if conducted in line with the text, should culminate in a state of full-bodied singleness, at which time the motion of the scanning can be brought to stillness and the mind can enter deeper concentration. In breath practice, mindfulness means keeping breath in mind. As the theme of the meditation, alertness means being sensitive to the sensation of the breath. Ardency means sticking to the process relentlessly, as well as taking on the stages of training, in which one tries to be aware of the entire body with each in and out breath, and to let the breath sensations grow calm. In terms of the jhana factors, mindfulness would be related to directed thought, alertness to evaluation, and ardency to singleness of preoccupation. As awareness fills the body and the breath grows calm, one's alertness stays steadily with the breath, and the mind enters the singleness of jhana. At this point, one no longer needs consciously to direct the mind to the breath or to enlarge one's awareness any further. Thus the mind, as above, can develop subtler mindfulness and alertness to enter the second jhana. According to section 33, once concentration has been established on one's own body in this way, it may give rise to similar knowledge and vision of the bodies of other people. Knowledge and vision here seem to denote intuitive knowledge through the psychic powers that some people develop through concentration. If used properly, this knowledge can help develop a sense of dispassion towards the process of existence, as one sees that all bodies, even the most desirable, are subject to the same common shortcomings of being inconstant, stressful, and not self. Whether one pursues this meditation with one's own body or the bodies of others, it comes under the first stage of practice, as indicated by the following phrase, quote, in this way, he remains focused internally on the body in and of itself, or externally on the body in and of itself, or both internally and externally on the body in and of itself. End of quote. Once the first stage has produced a solid state of concentration, the second stage, the development of the frame of reference, can begin. Quote, one remains focused on the phenomena of origination with regard to the body, on the phenomenon of passing away with regard to the body, or on the phenomenon of origination and passing away with regard to the body. End quote. The, quote, phenomenon of origination and passing away, end quote, covers three sorts of events: conditioned occurrences in the objects that form one's frame of reference itself, in this case the body, events in the other two objects, frames of reference, feeling and mind, or events in the approach frame of reference, i.e. the mental qualities that are developed in or interfere with the process of taking a frame of reference to begin with. For instance, when focusing on the body, One may notice this arising and passing away of breath sensations in the body, or one may notice that the arising and passing away of feelings of pleasure or mental states of irritation while one remains anchored in the body, or one might notice lapses of mindfulness in one's focus on the body. In each of these cases, if the origination and passing away is of neutral events such as the aggregates, one is directed simply to be aware of them as events and to let them follow their natural course unimpeded so as to see what factors accompany them and lead to their origination. As for events concerned with the presence or absence of skillfulness, however, one is encouraged to manipulate and experiment with them so as to observe and further understand their causal interrelationships. This will enable one to become skillful in maximizing skillful mental qualities and minimizing unskillful ones. In other words, one develops insight into the process of origination and passing away by taking an active and sensitive role in the process, just as one learns about eggs by trying to cook with them, gathering experiences from one's successes and failures in attempting increasingly difficult dishes. The need for active participation in the practice explains why meditation must begin by mastering a particular technique rather than passively watching whatever may arise in the present. This technique gives shape to one's present input. This technique gives shape to one's present input into the present moment and makes one more sensitive to this aspect of that conditionality. It also provides an active context for appreciating mental qualities as they help or hinder one's success in the technique. Eventually, when one's sensitivity is sufficiently well developed, one can go beyond the technique to explore and master the process of causality as it functions in developing skillful qualities in the mind. The process can be illustrated with the passage devoted to equanimity. In the first step, as one is still in the beginning stage of observing the mind in its attempts at meditation, one simply discerns the presence and absence of equanimity. Quote, "There is the case where, there being equanimity as a factor for awakening present within, he discerns that equanimity as a factor for awakening is present within me, or there being no equanimity as a factor for awakening present within, he discerns equanimity as a factor for awakening is not present within me." Unquote. In watching the course of this arising and passing away as one tries to bring the mind to the equanimity of jhana, one should begin to see patterns of cause and effect in what does and doesn't work. This enables one skillfully to give rise to equanimity even when it is not present of its own accord, and once it is present, one can strengthen it until it reaches the point of utmost development. Quote, "He discerns how there is the arising of unarisen equanimity as a factor for awakening, as he discerns how there is the culmination of the development of equanimity as a factor of awakening once it has arisen." Unquote. A similar process is recommended for events in the object frames of reference. This is shown by the standard description of the 16 steps of breath meditation. One trains oneself to breathe conscious of the entire body, or to breathe sensitive to the feelings of rapture and pleasure. As this training fosters the factors of jhana, one trains oneself to satisfy, steady, and release the mind, as this training brings mastery over the stages of jhana. Passage 1, section 179, makes a similar point, directing the meditator to replace unskillful forms of distress, joy, and equanimity with more skillful versions of the same emotions, and then replacing skillful distress with skillful joy, and skillful joy with skillful equanimity. As this process leads to stronger and more refined states of concentration, it refines one's sensitivity to the fact that the grosser one's participation in the process of origination and passing away in the mind, the grosser levels of stress that result. This leads one to let go of the grosser levels of one's participation, as one is able to detect them. This can have one of two results. One, it may lead to even more refined states of concentration as one abandons the factors that obscure equanimity, or as one focuses one's equanimity on ever more refined objects. Two, Or, as one becomes able to focus on the activity involved even in refining equanimity, one comes to realize that it, too, is a process of input into the present, fabricated for the sake of non-becoming. Thus, as a sense of dissipation develops towards equanimity, one goes beyond it to the state of non-fashioning, atamayata, through the third and final stage, the frames of reference practice. Quote, or his mindfulness that there is a body, feeling, mind, mental quality, is maintained simply to the extent of knowledge and recollection, and he remains independent, unsustained by, not clinging to, anything in the world. This stage corresponds to a mode of perception that the Buddha in MN 121 terms entry into emptiness. Thus he regards it, this mode of perception, as empty of whatever is not there. Whatever remains he discerns as present. There is this. This is the culminating equipoise where the path of practice leads unmediated to a state of non-fashioning, and from there to the fruit of the awakening and release. Some meditators, reading the two preceding passages, try to step independently to the stage of non-fashioning, without first having gained the inner sensitivity to cause and effect, action and non-action, that comes from developing concentration. In practice, though, this doesn't work. Only through the sensitivity can the basic causal relationship of dependent co-arising and that conditionality be discovered. This discovery is needed to give rise to the sense of dissipation, as one grows more and more disenchantment with the inconstant and artificial nature of all mental phenomena, and develops a strong desire to gain release from them. It is also needed to uncover the precise point of non-fashioning between becoming and non-becoming, where that release can be found. As we shall see in later sections, in particular 3E and 3H, the basic pattern on the three stages and frames of reference in meditation: focusing on events in and of themselves in the present moment, understanding their causal relationship with other events by learning to manipulate them skillfully, and then arriving at a state of fully developed equipoise, transcending even one's skill, free from any present input into the causal network, is basic to all aspects of Buddhist meditation practice. Among other things, it underlies the stages in breath meditation, the mastery of concentration, and the strategy of discernment leading to the transcendent. Thus, it should be kept firmly in mind when reading passages not only in this section, but also throughout the entire book. The texts contained in this section, for the most part, provide added details to the outline sketched here. For example, sections 45 through 40 and 46 provide a variation on stage 2 by showing how mindfulness can be developed into equanimity by manipulating perception, viewing loathsome objects as unloathsome, and unloathsome objects as loathsome, etc. Anyone attempting these perception games needs firm powers of concentration and sharp discernment so as not to become obsessed with perception distortion, sana vipallasa. If handled properly, though, the process of manipulation gives important insights into the way the mind labels its objects and can drive home lessons on the arbitrary nature of perception and the need to not be deceived by it. The same point holds true for the contemplation of body parts mentioned in section 30. This contemplation has been denounced in Western circles for promoting a negative self-image, but here it is necessary to distinguish between healthy and unhealthy negative images of one's own body. An unhealthy negative image is one that views the body of other people as attractive and one's own as unattractive. This is unhealthy in that it creates feelings of inferiority concerning one's own body, compounded by lust and desire for the bodies of others. A healthy negative image sees that all bodies, no matter how attractive, young, or healthy they may seem at the skin level, are composed of the very same parts, all equally unattractive. The livers and intestines of even the most attractive people, if paraded down the walkway, would never capture a title of a beauty contest. If featured in an advertisement, they wouldn't sell. Thus, there is no real reason to feel that one's body is inherently inferior to theirs. This perception of the equality of all bodies, if handled properly, is healthy in that it helps liberate one from not only feelings of inferiority and superiority, but also from the disease of lust and desire, promoting a sense of dispassion towards lustful thoughts in general. As this theme of contemplation is developed through hands-on manipulation of one's perception of the body, it enables one to realize that when reduced to their simple bodiness as bodies in and of themselves, all bodies are on a par, and that questions of attractiveness and unattractiveness derive ultimately from the context of one's frame of reference. One sees that the obstacles to equanimity and higher insights in this practice are not so much the objects of lust or hatred as they are the terms and contexts in which these objects are perceived. The insights can form the basis for perceptual skills that can act as a very liberating antidote to the mind's tendency to self-delusion. One passage contained here that does not deal with the stages of frames of reference meditation is section 47. This passage focuses on a change that has been often leveled at early Buddhism, that the practice it recommends is essentially selfish, in that one is striving simply for one's own welfare. The Buddha answers this charge by denying any radical distinction between one's own true welfare and that of others. To work for the true welfare of others is to work for one's own true welfare. To work for one's own is to work for theirs. The first point can be illustrated by a number of passages in this collection, showing, for example, how expressions of gratitude to one's parents can foster one's own true happiness, how support for contemplatives enables one to hear the Dhamma, how virtuous conduct towards other people and their possessions strengthens mindfulness, and how attitudes of goodwill, compassion, empathetic joy, and equanimity foster concentration and release the mind from obstructive mental qualities. Thus, the quality of one's assistance to others cannot help but have an effect on the development of one's own mind. As for the reverse dynamic, the way in which working for one's own welfare also works for the welfare of others, the Buddha illustrates this point with a perceptive analogy for the interaction of living beings. Two acrobats balancing on the end of a pole. If one acrobat loses balance, both will fall. For both to stay balanced, each must maintain his or her own balance. This analogy indicates that the act of developing good qualities in one's own mind is in itself the act of kindness to others. One protects them from the detrimental effects of one's uncontrollable anger, etc., and exposes them to the beneficial effects of one's own mindfulness, equanimity, and other skillful qualities. Thus, it is not possible to practice the frames of reference properly without the rest of the world's benefiting to a greater or lesser degree. And in a world where no one can keep the balance of another person, the example of one's own skill in keeping balance is an instructive gift for those with the eyes to see and the intelligence to take one's example to heart. Once one has attained full awakening and needs to do nothing more with one's own welfare, one continues to act for the welfare of others within the framework of the three frames of reference, or establishing of mindfulness. Different from the four discussed in this section, the three are the ability to remain untroubled, mindful, and alert when others do not respond to one's teachings, equanimous, mindful, and alert when some do and some do not respond to one's teachings, untroubled, mindful, and alert when others do respond to one's teachings. In other words, One's mental balance is so firm that others' success or failure in responding to one's help cannot disturb the mind. It is only in this context, in the three frames of reference following full awakening, that the Buddha allows for the possibility of helping others with no thought of one's own welfare. For at that point, one's true welfare has no further needs. The awakened person lives out the remainder of her or his life insofar as she or he, his karma allows, for the welfare, quote, the welfare of the many, the happiness of the many, and of compassion for the world. Passages from the Pali Canon. Section 26. Imagine a tree devoid of branches and leaves. Its buds don't grow to maturity. Its bark doesn't grow to maturity. Its sapwood doesn't grow to maturity. Its heartwood doesn't grow to maturity. In the same way, when there is no mindfulness or alertness, a person is devoid of mindfulness or alertness. The prerequisite for a sense of shame and compunction becomes spoiled. There being no sense of shame and compunction, the prerequisite for restraint of the senses becomes spoiled. There being no restraint of the senses, the prerequisite for virtue becomes spoiled. There being no virtue, the prerequisite for right concentration becomes spoiled. There being no right concentration, the prerequisite for knowledge and vision of things as they have come to be becomes spoiled. There being no knowledge and vision of the things as they have come to be, the prerequisite for disenchantment and dispassion becomes spoiled. There being no disenchantment and dispassion, the prerequisite for knowledge and vision of release becomes spoiled. Now imagine a tree. In its branches and leaves, its bud grows to maturity, its bark grows to maturity, its sapwood grows to maturity, its heartwood grows to maturity. In the same way, when, there being mindfulness and alertness, a person is abundant in mindfulness and alertness. The prerequisite for a sense of shame and compunction becomes abundant. There being a sense of shame and compunction, the prerequisite for restraint of the senses becomes abundant. There being restraint of the senses, the prerequisite for virtue becomes abundant. There being virtue, the prerequisite for right concentration becomes abundant. There being right concentration, the prerequisite for knowledge and vision of things as they have come to be becomes abundant. There being knowledge and vision of things as they have come to be, the prerequisite for disenchantment and dispassion becomes abundant. There being disenchantment and dispassion, the prerequisite for knowledge and vision of release becomes abundant. Section 27. Then Uttaya. It would be good, Venerable Sir, if the Blessed One would teach me the Dhamma in brief, so that, having heard the Dhamma from the Blessed One, I might dwell alone, secluded, heedful, ardent, and resolute. The Buddha. In that case, Uttaya, you should purify what is most basic with regard to skillful mental qualities. And what is the basis of skillful mental qualities? Well-purified virtue and views made straight. Then, when your virtue is well purified and your views made straight, independence on virtue, established in virtue, you should develop the four frames of reference. Then, when independence on virtue, relying on virtue, you develop the four frames of reference, you will go beyond the realm of death. Section 28. Mindful and alert. Mindful and alert. Stay mindful, monks, and alert. This is our instruction to you all. And how is a monk mindful? This is the case where a monk remains focused on the body in and of itself, alert, ardent, and mindful, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. He remains focused on feelings, mind, mental qualities, in and of themselves, ardent, alert, and mindful, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. This is how a monk is mindful. And how is a monk alert? There is the case where feelings are known to the monk as they arise, known as they persist, known as they subside. Thoughts are known to him as they arise, known as they persist, known as they subside. Discernment, perception, is known to him as it arises, known as it persists, known as it subsides. This is how a monk is alert. So stay mindful, monks, and alert. This is our instruction to you all. Section 29. I will teach you the frames of reference, their development, and the path of practice leading to their development. Listen and pay close attention. I will speak. Now, what are the frames of reference? There is the case where a monk remains focused on the body in and of itself, ardent, alert, and mindful, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. He remains focused on feelings, mind, mental qualities in and of themselves, ardent, alert, and mindful, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. These are called the frames of reference. And what is the development of the frames of reference? There is the case where a monk remains focused on the phenomenon of origination with regard to the body, remains focused on the phenomenon of passing away with regard to the body, remains focused on the phenomenon of origination and passing away with regard to the body. Ardent, alert, and mindful, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. He remains focused on the phenomenon of origination with regards to feelings, with regard to the mind, with regard to mental qualities, remains focused on the phenomenon of passing away with regard to mental qualities, remains focused on the phenomenon of origination and passing away with regard to mental qualities, ardent, alert, and mindful, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. This is called development of the frames of reference. And what is the path of practice to the development of the frames of reference? Just this noble eightfold path: right view, right resolve, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. This is called the path of practice to the development of the frames of reference. Section 30. In detail. This is the direct path for the purification of beings, for the overcoming of sorrow and lamentation, for the disappearance of pain and distress, for the attainment of the right method, and the realization of unbinding, in other words, the 4 frames of reference. Which 4? This is the case where a monk remains focused on the body in and of itself, ardent, alert, and mindful, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. He remains focused on feelings, mind, mental qualities in and of themselves, ardent, alert, and mindful, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. Body. And how does the monk remain focused on the body in and of itself? There is the case where a monk, having gone to the wilderness and to the foot of a tree or to an empty building, sits down, folding his legs crosswise, holding his body erect, and setting mindfulness to the fore, Pari Mukha, in the Abhidhamma, which is translated literally as around the mouth. In the Vinaya, the same term is used to mean the front of the chest. Always mindful, he breathes in. Mindful, he breathes out. Breathing in long, he discerns, I am breathing in long. And breathing out long, he discerns, I am breathing out long. Or breathing in short, he discerns, I am breathing in short. Or breathing out short, he discerns, I am breathing out short. He trains himself, I will breathe in, sensitive to the entire body. He trains himself, I will breathe out, sensitive to the entire body. He trains himself, I will breathe in, calming the body. Fabrication, the in and out breath. He trains himself, I will breathe out, calming bodily fabrication. Just as a skillful tuner or his apprentice, when making a turn, discerns, I am making a long turn. Or when I'm making a short turn, discerns, I am making a short turn. In the same way, the monk, when breathing in long, discerns, I am breathing in long. Or breathing out long, he discerns, I am breathing out long. He trains himself, I will breathe in, calming bodily fabrication. He trains himself, I will breathe out, calming body fabrication. In this way, he remains focused internally on the body in and of itself, or externally on the body in and of itself, or both internally and externally on the body in and of itself. Or he remains focused on the phenomenon of origination with regard to the body, on the phenomenon of passing away with regard to the body, or on the phenomenon of origination and passing away with regard to the body. Or his mindfulness that there is a body is maintained to the extent of knowledge and recollection, and he remains unsustained by, not clinging to anything in the world. This is how a monk remains focused on the body in and of itself. Furthermore, when walking, the monk discerns, I am walking. When standing, he discerns, I am standing. When sitting, he discerns, I am sitting. When lying down, he discerns, I am lying down. Or however his body is disposed, this is how he discerns it. In this way, he remains focused internally on the body in and of itself, or focused externally, unsustained by anything in the world. This is how a monk remains focused on the body in and of itself. Furthermore, when going forward and returning, he makes himself fully alert. When looking toward and looking away, when bending and extending his limbs, when carrying his outer cloak, his upper robes, and his bowl, when eating, drinking, chewing, and savoring, when urinating and defecating, when waking, standing, sitting, falling asleep, when walking, standing, sitting, falling asleep, waking up, talking, and remaining silent, he makes himself fully alert. In this way, he remains focused internally on the body in and of itself, or focused externally, unsustained by anything in the world. And this is how a monk remains focused on the body in and of itself. Furthermore, just as if a sack with openings at both ends were full of various kinds of grain, wheat, rice, mung beans, kidney beans, sesame seeds, husked rice, and a man with good eyesight pouring it out were to reflect, this is wheat, this is rice, these are mung beans, these are kidney beans, these are sesame seeds, this is husked rice. In the same way, a monk reflects on this body from the soles of the feet on up to the crown of the head on down, surrounded by skin and full of various kinds of unclean things. In this body there are head hairs, body hairs, nails, teeth, skin, flesh, tendons, bones, bone marrow, kidneys, heart, liver, pleura, spleen, lungs, large intestines, small intestines, gorge, feces, bile, phlegm, pus, blood, sweat, fat, tears, skin oil, saliva, mucus, fluid in the joints, urine. In this way he remains focused internally on the body in and of itself, or focused externally, unsustained by anything in the world. This is how a monk remains focused on the body in and of itself. Furthermore, just as a skillful butcher or his apprentice, having killed a cow, would sit at a crossroads cutting it into pieces, the monk contemplates this very body, however it stands, however it is disposed, in terms of its properties. In this body, this is where in this body there is the earth property, the liquid property, the fire property, and the wind property. In this way, he remains focused internally on the body in and of itself, or focused externally, unsustained by anything in the world. This is how the monk remains focused on the body in and of itself. Furthermore, as if he were to see a corpse cast away in the charnel ground, day 1, day 2, day 3 days dead, bloated, livid, and festering, he applies it to this very body. This body, too, such is its nature, such is its future, such its unavoidable fate. And again, as if he were to see a corpse cast away in a charnel ground, picked at by crows, vultures, and hawks, by dogs, hyenas, and various other creatures, a skeleton smeared with flesh and blood, connected with tendons, a fleshless skeleton smeared with blood, connected with tendons, a skeleton without flesh or blood, connected with tendons, bones detached from their tendons, scattered in all directions. Here a hand bone, there a foot bone, here a shin bone, there a thigh bone, here a hip bone, there a backbone, here a rib, there a chest bone, here a shoulder bone, there a neck bone, here a jaw bone, there a tooth, here a skull. The bones whiten, somewhat like the colors of shells, piled up more than a year old, decomposed into powder. He applies it to this very body. This body, too, such as is its nature, such is its future, such its unavoidable fate. In this way, he remains focused internally on the body in and of itself, or externally on the body in and of itself, or both internally and externally on the body in and of itself, or he remains focused on the phenomenon of origination with regard to the body, on the phenomenon of passing away with regard to the body, or on the phenomenon of origination and passing away with regard to the body, or his mindfulness that there is a body is maintained to the extent of knowledge and recollection, and he remains unsustained by not clinging to anything in the world. This is how a monk remains focused on the feelings of the body in and of itself. Feelings. And how does a monk remain focused on feelings in and of themselves? There is the case where a monk, when feeling a painful feeling, discerns, I am feeling a painful feeling, and when feeling a pleasant feeling, he discerns, I am feeling a pleasant feeling, and when feeling neither painful nor pleasant feeling, he discerns, I am feeling neither painful nor pleasant feelings. When feeling a painful feeling of the flesh, he discerns, I'm feeling a painful feeling of the flesh. When feeling a painful feeling not of the flesh, he discerns, I'm feeling a painful feeling not of the flesh. When feeling a pleasant feeling of the flesh, he discerns, I'm feeling a pleasant feeling of the flesh. When feeling a pleasant feeling not of the flesh, he discerns, I'm feeling a pleasant feeling not of the flesh. And when feeling neither painful nor pleasant feelings of the flesh, he discerns, I am feeling neither pleasant nor painful feelings of the flesh, and when feeling neither pleasant nor painful feelings of the flesh, he discerns, what was that not before? I am feeling neither painful nor pleasant feelings not of the flesh. We got it right. In this way, he remains focused internally on feelings in and of themselves, or externally on feelings in and of themselves, or both internally and externally on feelings in and of themselves. Or he remains focused on the phenomenon of origination with regard to feelings, on the phenomenon of passing away with regards to the feelings, or on the phenomenon of origination and passing away with regards to the feelings, or his mindfulness that there are feelings is maintained to the extent of knowledge and recollection, and he remains unsustained by, not clinging to, anything in the world. This is how a monk remains focused on the feelings in and of themselves. Mind. And how does a monk remain focused on the mind in and of itself? There is a case where a monk, when the mind has passion, discerns that the mind has passion. When the mind is without passion, he discerns that the mind is without passion. When the mind has aversion, he discerns that the mind has aversion. And when the mind is without aversion, he discerns that the mind is without aversion. And when the mind has delusion, he discerns that the mind has delusion. And when the mind is without delusion, he discerns that the mind is without delusion. When the mind is constricted, he discerns that the mind is constricted. When the mind is scattered, he discerns that the mind is scattered. When the mind is enlarged, he discerns that the mind is enlarged. When the mind is not enlarged, he discerns that the mind is not enlarged. When the mind is surpassed, he discerns that the mind is surpassed. When the mind is unsurpassed, he discerns that the mind is unsurpassed. When the mind is concentrated, he discerns that the mind is concentrated. When the mind is not concentrated, he discerns that the mind is not concentrated. When the mind is released, he discerns that the mind is released. When the mind is not released, he discerns that the mind is not released. In this way, he remains focused internally on the mind in and of itself, or externally on the mind in and of itself, or both internally and externally on the mind in and of itself. Or he remains focused on the phenomenon of origination with regard to the mind, on the phenomenon of passing away with regard to the mind, or on the phenomenon of origination and passing away with regard to the mind, or his mindfulness that, there is a mind, is maintained to the extent of knowledge and recollection, and he remains unsustained by, not clinging to, anything in this world. This is how a monk remains focused on the mind in and of itself. Mental qualities. And how does a monk remain focused on mental qualities in and of themselves? There is the case where a monk remains focused on mental qualities in and of themselves with reference to the 5 hindrances. And how does a monk remain focused on the mental qualities in and of themselves with reference to the 5 hindrances? There is the case where there being sensual desire present within, a monk discerns, there is sensual desire present within me, or there being no sensual desire present within, he discerns, there is no sensual desire present within me. He discerns how there is the arising of unarisen sensual desire. And he discerns how there is the abandoning of sensual desire once it has arisen, and he discerns how there is no further arising in the future of sensual desire that has been abandoned. The same formula is repeated with the remaining hindrances: ill will, sloth, drowsiness, and ill will, sloth and drowsiness, restlessness and anxiety, and uncertainty. In this way, he remains focused internally on mental qualities in and of themselves, or externally on mental qualities in and of themselves, or both internally and externally on mental qualities in and of themselves. Or he remains focused on the phenomenon of origination with regard to mental qualities, on the phenomenon of passing away with regard to mental qualities, or on the phenomenon of origination and passing away with regard to mental qualities. Or his mindfulness that there are mental qualities is maintained to the extent of knowledge and recollection, and he remains unsustained by, not clinging to, anything in this world. This is how a monk remains focused on mental qualities in and of themselves with reference to the 5 hindrances. Furthermore, a monk remains focused on mental qualities in and of themselves with reference to the 5 clinging aggregates. And how does he remain focused on mental qualities in and of themselves with reference to the 5 clinging aggregates? There is the case where a monk discerns such is form, such its origination, such its disappearance, such is feeling, such is perception, such are fabrications, such is consciousness, such is origination, such its disappearance. In this way, he remains focused internally on mental qualities in and of themselves, or focused externally, unsustained by anything in the world. This is how a monk remains focused on mental qualities in and of themselves with reference to the 5 clinging aggregates. Furthermore, the monk remains focused on mental qualities in and of themselves with reference to the 6-fold internal and external sense media. And how does he remain focused on mental qualities in and of themselves with reference to the 6-fold internal and external sense media? This is the case where he discerns the I, he discerns forms. He discerns the fetter that arises dependent on both. He discerns how there is the arising of an unarisen fetter. He discerns how there is an abandoning of a fetter once it has arisen. And he discerns how there is no further appearance in the future of a fetter that has been abandoning. Similarly with the ear, nose, tongue, body, and intellect. In this way, he remains focused internally on mental qualities in and of themselves, or focused externally, unsustained by anything in the world. This is how a monk remains focused on mental qualities in and of themselves with reference to the 6-fold internal and external sense media. Furthermore, the monk remains focused on mental qualities in and of themselves with reference to the 7 factors for awakening. And how does he remain focused on mental qualities in and of themselves with reference to the 7 factors for awakening? This is the case where, there being mindfulness as a factor for awakening present within, he discerns mindfulness as a factor for awakening is present within me, or there being no mindfulness as a factor for awakening present within, he discerns mindfulness as a factor for awakening is not present within me. He discerns how there is the arising of unarisen mindfulness as a factor for awakening, and he discerns how there is a culmination of the development of mindfulness as a factor for awakening once it has arisen. The same formula is repeated for the remaining factors of awakening for awakening: analysis of qualities, persistence, rapture, serenity, concentration, and equanimity. In this way, he remains focused internally on mental qualities in and of themselves or externally, unsustained by, not clinging to, anything in the world. And this is how a monk remains focused on mental qualities in and of themselves with reference to the 7 factors for awakening. Furthermore, the monk remains focused on the mental qualities in and of themselves with reference to the 4 noble truths. And how does he remain focused on mental qualities in and of themselves with reference to the 4 noble truths? There is the case where he discerns, as it has come to be, that this is stress. This is the origination of stress. This is the cessation of stress. This is the way leading to the cessation of stress. In this way, he remains focused internally on mental qualities in and of themselves, or externally on mental qualities in and of themselves, or both internally and externally on mental qualities in and of themselves. He remains focused on the phenomenon of origination with regard to mental qualities, on the phenomenon of passing away with regard to mental qualities, or on the phenomenon of origination and passing away with regard to mental qualities. Or his mindfulness that there are mental qualities is maintained to the extent of knowledge and recollection, and he remains unsustained by, not clinging to anything in the world. This is how a monk remains focused on mental qualities in and of themselves with reference to the 4 noble truths. Now, if anyone would develop these 4 frames of reference in this way for 7 years, then one of 2 fruits can be expected for him: either gnosis, the knowledge of awakening, right here and now, or, if there be any remnant of clinging sustenance, non-return. Let alone 7 years. If anyone would develop these 4 frames of reference in this way for 6 years, 5, 4, 3, 2 years, 1 year, 7 months, 6 months, 5, 4, 3, 2 months, 1 month, half a month, then one of 2 fruits can be expected for him: either gnosis right here and now, or, if there be any remnant of clinging and sustenance, non-return. Let alone half a month. If anyone would develop these 4 frames of reference in this way for 7 days, then one of the 2 fruits can be expected for him: either gnosis right here and now, or, if there be any remnant of clinging sustenance, non-return. This is the direct path for the purification of beings, for the overcoming of sorrow and lamentation, for the disappearance of pain and distress, for the attainment of the right method, and for the realization of unbinding. In other words, the 4 frames of reference. Thus it was said, and in reference to this it was said. Section 31. In practice. Now, how does mindfulness of in and out breathing, when developed and pursued, bring the 4 frames of reference to culmination? On whatever occasion a monk breathing in long discerns, I am breathing in long, or breathing out long, he discerns, I am breathing out long, or breathing in short, he discerns, I am breathing in short, or breathing out short, he discerns, I am breathing out short, trains himself. I will breathe in, out, sensitive to the entire body, trains himself, I will breathe in and out, calming bodily fabrication. On that occasion, the monk remains focused on the body in and of itself, ardent, alert, and mindful, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. I tell you, monks, that the in and out breath, is classed as a body among the bodies, which is why the monk on that occasion remains focused on the body in and of itself, ardent, alert, and mindful, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. On whatever occasion a monk trains himself, I will breathe in and out, sensitive to rapture. Trains himself, I will breathe in and out, sensitive to pleasure. Trains himself, I will breathe in and out, sensitive to mental fabrication. Trains himself, I will breathe in and out, calming mental fabrication. On that occasion, the monk remains focused on feelings in and of themselves, ardent, alert, and mindful, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. I tell you, monks, that this close attention to in and out breaths is classed as a feeling among feelings, which is why the monk on that occasion remains focused on feelings in and of themselves, ardent, alert, and mindful, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. On whatever occasion a monk trains himself, I will breathe in and out, sensitive to the mind. Trains himself, I will breathe in and out, gladdening the mind. And trains himself, I will breathe in and out, steadying the mind. Trains himself, I will breathe in and out, releasing the mind. And on that occasion, the monk remains focused on the mind in and of itself, ardent, alert, and mindful, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. I don't say that there is mindfulness of in and out breathing in one of confused mindfulness and no alertness, which is why the monk on that occasion remains focused on the mind in and of itself, ardent, alert, and mindful, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. On whatever occasion a monk trains himself, I will breathe in and out, focusing on inconstancy. Trains himself, I will breathe in and out, focusing on dispassion. Trains himself, I will breathe in and out, focusing on cessation. Trains himself, I will breathe in and out, focusing on relinquishment. On that occasion, the monk remains focused on mental qualities of in and out themselves, ardent, alert, and mindful, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. He who sees clearly with discernment the abandoning of greed and distress is one who oversees with equanimity, which is why the monk on that occasion remains focused on mental qualities in and of themselves, ardent, alert, and mindful, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. This is how mindfulness of in and out breathing, when developed and pursued, brings the four frames of reference to culmination. Section 32. Internal and external. There is the case where a monk remains focused internally on the body in and of itself, ardent, alert, and mindful, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. As he remains focused internally on the body in and of itself, he becomes rightly concentrated there, rightly clear. Rightly concentrated there and rightly clear, he gives rise to knowledge and vision externally of the bodies of others. He remains focused internally on feelings in and of themselves, ardent, alert, and mindful, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. As he remains focused internally on the feelings in and of themselves, he becomes rightly concentrated there, rightly clear, rightly concentrated there, and rightly clear. He gives rise to knowledge and vision externally of the feelings of others. He remains focused internally on the mind in and of itself, ardent, alert, and mindful, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. And as he remains focused internally on the mind in and of itself, he becomes rightly concentrated there, and rightly clear, and rightly concentrated there, and rightly clear. He gives rise to knowledge and vision externally of the mind of others. He remains focused internally on mental qualities in and of themselves, ardent, alert, and mindful, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. As he remains focused internally on mental qualities in and of themselves, he becomes rightly concentrated there, rightly clear, rightly concentrated there, and rightly clear. He gives rise to knowledge and vision externally of the mental qualities of others. Section 33. Having abandoned the five hindrances, imperfections of awareness that weaken discernment, the monk remains focused on the body in and of itself, ardent, alert, and mindful, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. He remains focused on feelings, mind, mental qualities in and of themselves, ardent, alert, and mindful, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. Just as if an elephant trainer were to plant a large post in the ground, and were to bind a forest elephant to it by the neck in order to break it of its forest habits, its forest memories and resolve, its distractions, fatigue, and fever over leaving the forest, to make it delight in the town, and to inculcate it in habits congenial to human beings. In the same way, these four frames of reference are bindings for the awareness of the disciple of the Noble One, to break him of his household habits, his household memories, and resolve his distractions, fatigue, and fever over leaving the household life, for the attainment of the right method and realization of unbinding. Then the Tathagata trains him further. Come, monk, remain focused on the body in and of itself, but do not think any thoughts connected with the body. Remain focused on feelings in and of themselves, but do not think any thoughts connected with feelings. Remain focused on the mind in and of itself, but do not think any thoughts connected with the mind. Remain focused on mental qualities in and of themselves, but do not think any thoughts connected with mental qualities. With the stilling of directed thoughts and evaluations, he enters the second jhana. 34. Monks, those who are new, not long gone, fourth, only recently come to this doctrine and discipline, should be roused, encouraged, and exhorted by you to develop the four frames of reference in this way. Come, friends, remain focused on the body in and of itself, being ardent, alert, unified, clear-minded, concentrated, and single-minded for knowledge of the body as it has come to be. Remain focused on feelings in and of themselves, on the mind in and of themselves, on mental qualities in and of themselves, being ardent, alert, unified, clear-minded, concentrated, and single-minded for knowledge of mental qualities as they have come to be. Monks, even those who are learners, stream winners to non-returners, who have yet to attain their heart's desire, who stay resolved on the unexcelled security from bondage, even they remain focused on the body in and of itself, ardent, alert, unified, clear-minded, concentrated, single-minded for complete comprehension of the body. They remain focused on feelings in and of themselves, on the mind in and of itself, on mental qualities in and of itself, being ardent, alert, unified, clear-minded, concentrated, and single-minded for complete comprehension of mental qualities. Even those who are arahats, whose mental effluents are ended, who have reached fulfillment, done the task, laid down the burden, attained the true goal, totally dissolved the fetter of becoming, and who are released through right gnosis, even they remain focused on the body in and of itself, being ardent, alert, unified, clear-minded, concentrated, single-minded, and disjoined from the body. They remain focused on feelings in and of themselves, on the mind in and of itself, on mental qualities in and of themselves, being ardent, alert, unified, clear-minded, concentrated, and single-minded, disjointed from mental qualities. Even those who are new, not long gone forth, only recently come to this doctrine and discipline, should be roused, encouraged, and exhorted by you to develop the four frames of reference in this way. Section 35, taking note. Suppose that there is a foolish, inexperienced, unskillful cook, who has presented a king or a king's minister with various kinds of curry, mainly sour, mainly bitter, mainly peppery, mainly sweet, alkaline or non-alkaline, salty or not salty. He does not take note, literally pick up on the theme of it, his master, thinking, today my master likes this curry, or he reaches out for that curry, or he takes a lot of this curry, or he praises that curry. As a result, he is not rewarded with clothing or wages or gifts. Why is that? Because the foolish, inexperienced, unskillful cook does not pick up on the theme of his own master. In the same way, there are cases where a foolish, inexperienced, unskillful monk remains focused on the body in and of itself, ardent, alert, and mindful, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. As he remains thus focused on the body in and of itself, his mind does not become concentrated. His defilements, the five hindrances, are not abandoned. He does not take note of the fact and does not pick up on the theme. He remains focused on feelings in and of themselves, the mind in and of itself, mental qualities in and of itself, ardent, alert, and mindful, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. As he remains thus focused on mental qualities in and of themselves, his mind does not become concentrated. His defilements are not abandoned. He does not take note of that fact. As a result, he is not rewarded with the pleasant abiding here and now, nor with mindfulness and alertness. Why is that? Because the foolish, inexperienced, unskillful monk does not take note of his own mind, does not pick up on the theme of his own mind. Now suppose that there is a wise, experienced, skillful cook who has presented the king or a king's minister with various kinds of curry. He takes note of his master thinking, today my master likes that curry, or he reaches out for this curry, or he takes a lot of curry, or he praises that curry. As a result, he is rewarded with clothing, wages, and gifts. Why is that? Because the wise, experienced, skillful cook picks up on the theme of his own master. In the same way, there are cases where a wise, experienced, skillful monk remains focused on the body in and of itself, feelings in and of themselves, the mind in and of itself, mental qualities in and of themselves, ardent, alert, and mindful, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. As he remains thus focused on mental qualities in and of themselves, his mind becomes concentrated, his defilements are abandoned. He takes note of the fact. As a result, he is rewarded with a pleasant abiding here and now, together with mindfulness and alertness. Why is that? Because the wise, experienced, skillful monk picks on themes of his own mind. Section 36. Directing and not directing the mind. Ananda, if a monk or nun remains with mind well established in the four frames of reference, he may be expected to realize greater than ever distinction. There is the case of a monk who remains focused on the body in and of itself, ardent, alert, and mindful, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. As he remains thus focused on the body in and of itself, a fever based on the body arises within his body, or there is sluggishness in his awareness, or his mind becomes scattered externally. He should then direct his mind to any inspiring theme, commentary such as recollection of the Buddha. End of commentary. As his mind is directed to any inspiring theme, delight arises within him. In one who feels delight, rapture arises. In one whose mind is enraptured, the body grows serene. His body serene, he feels pleasure. As he feels pleasure, his mind grows concentrated. He reflects, I have attained the aim to which my mind was directed. Let me withdraw my mind from the inspiring theme. He withdraws and engages neither in directed thought nor in evaluation. He discerns, I am not thinking or evaluating. I am inwardly mindful and at ease. Furthermore, he remains focused on feelings, mind, mental qualities in and of themselves, ardent, alert, and mindful, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. As he remains thus focused on mental qualities in and of themselves, a fever based on mental qualities arises within his body, or there is sluggishness in his awareness, or his mind becomes scattered externally. He should then direct his mind to any inspiring theme. Delight arises within him. In one who feels delight, rapture arises. In one whose mind is enraptured, the body grows serene. His body serene, he is sensitive to pleasure. As he feels pleasure, his mind grows concentrated. He reflects, I have attained the aim to which my mind was directed. Let me withdraw. He withdraws and engages neither in directed thought nor in evaluation. He discerns, I am not thinking or evaluating. I am inwardly mindful and at ease. Thus, Ananda, is development based on directing. And what is development based on not directing? A monk, when not directing the mind to external things, discerns, my mind is not directed to external things. It is unconstricted front and back, released and undirected. And furthermore, I remain focused on the body in and of itself. I am ardent, alert, and mindful and at ease. When not directing his mind to external things, he discerns, my mind is not directed to external things. It is unconstricted front and back, released and undirected, and furthermore, I remain focused on feelings, mind, mental qualities in and of themselves. I am ardent, alert, and mindful and at ease. Thus, Ananda is development based on not directing. Now, Ananda, I have taught you development based on directing and development based on not directing. What a teacher should do out of compassion for his disciples, seeking their welfare, that I have done for you. Over there are places to sit at, the foot of the trees. Over there are empty dwellings. Practice jhana, Ananda. Do not be heedless. Do not be more remorseful in the future. That is our instruction to you all. Section 37. Proper Range 1. Once a hawk suddenly swooped down on a quail and seized it. Then the quail, as it was being carried off by the hawk, lamented, "Oh, just my bad luck and lack of merit, that I was wandering out of my proper range and into the territory of others. If only I had kept my proper range today, to my own ancestral territory, this hawk would have been no match for me in battle." "But what is your proper range?" the hawk asked. "And what is your own ancestral territory?" "A newly plotted field with clumps of earth all turned up." So the hawk, without bragging about its own strength, without mentioning its own strength, let go of the quail. "Go, quail. But even when you have gone there, you won't escape me." Then the quail, having gone to the newly plowed field with clumps of earth all turned up, and climbing up to the top of a new clump of earth, stood taunting the hawk. "Now come and get me, you hawk! Now come and get me, you hawk!" So the hawk, without bragging about its own strength, without mentioning its own strength, folded its two wings and suddenly swooped down toward the quail. When the quail knew, "The hawk is coming at me full speed," it slipped behind the clump of earth, and right there the hawk shattered its breast. This is what happens to anyone who wanders into what is not his proper range, and is in the territory of others. For this reason, you should not wander into what is not your proper range and is the territory of others. In one who wanders into what is not his proper range and is the territory of others, Mara gains an opening. Mara gains a foothold. And what, for a monk, is not his proper range and is the territory of others? The 5 strings of sensuality. Which 5? Forms cognizable by the eye. Agreeable, pleasant, charming, endearing, fostering desire, enticing. Sounds cognized by the ear, smells cognized by the nose, taste cognized by the tongue, tactile sensations cognized by the body, agreeable, pleasant, charming, endearing, fostering desire, enticing. These, for a monk, are not his proper range and are the territory of others. Wander, monks, in what is your proper range, your own ancestral territory. In one who wanders in what is his proper range, his own ancestral territory, Mara gains no openings. Mara gains no foothold. And what, for a monk, is his proper range, his own ancestral territory? The 4 frames of reference. This, for a monk, is his proper range, his own ancestral territory. Section 38, Proper Range 2. There are, in the Himalayas, the king of mountains, difficult, uneven areas, where neither monkeys nor human beings wander. There are difficult, uneven areas where monkeys wander, but not human beings. There are level stretches of land, delightful, where both monkeys and human beings wander. In such spots, hunters set a tar trap in the monkeys' tracks, in order to catch some monkeys. These monkeys, who are not foolish or careless by nature, when they see the tar trap, avoid it from afar. But any monkey who is foolish and careless by nature comes up to the tar trap and grabs it with its paw. He gets stuck there thinking, "I'll free my paw." He grabs it with the other paw. He gets stuck there too, thinking, "I'll free both my paws." He grabs it with his foot. He gets stuck there too, thinking, "I'll free both my paws and my foot." And then he grabs it with his other foot, and he gets stuck there too, thinking, "I'll free both my paws and my feet as well." He grabs it with his mouth. He gets stuck there. So the monkey, snared in 5 ways, lies there whimpering, having fallen on misfortune, falling on ruin, a prey to whatever the hunter wants to do with him. Then the hunter, without releasing the monkey, skewers him right there, picks him up, and goes off as he likes. This is what happens to anyone who wanders into what is not his proper range, and is in the territory of others. For this reason, you should not wander into what is not your proper range, and is the territory of others. Section 39. Mindfulness of the body. There is the case where a monk, seeing a form with the eye, is obsessed with pleasing forms, is repelled by unpleasing forms, and remains with body mindfulness unestablished, with limited awareness. He does not discern, as it has come to be, the awareness release, the discernment release, where any evil, unskillful mental qualities that have arisen utterly cease without trace. Similarly with ear, nose, tongue, body, and intellect. Just as if a person, catching 6 animals of different ranges, of different habitats, were to bind them with a strong rope. Catching a snake, he would bind it with a strong rope. Catching a crocodile, a bird, a dog, a hyena, a monkey, he would bind it with a strong rope. Binding them all with a strong rope, and tying a knot in the middle, he would set chase to them. Then those 6 animals of different ranges, of different habitats, would each pull towards its own range and habitat. The snake would pull, thinking, I'll get into the anthill. The crocodile would pull, thinking, I'll go into the water. The bird would pull, thinking, I'll fly up into the air. And the dog would pull, thinking, I'll go into the village. And then the hyena would pull, thinking, I'll go into the charnel ground. And the monkey would pull, thinking, I'll go into the forest. And when these 6 animals became internally exhausted, they would submit. They would surrender. They would come under the sway of whichever among them was the strongest. In the same way, when a monk whose mindfulness immersed in the body is undeveloped and unpursued, the eye pulls towards what pleasing forms, while unpleasing forms are repelled. The ear pulls towards pleasing sounds, the nose pulls towards pleasing smells, the tongue pulls towards pleasing tastes, the body pulls towards pleasing tactile sensations, the intellect pulls towards pleasing ideas, while unpleasant ideas are repellent. This, monks, is lack of restraint. And what is restraint? There is the case where a monk, seeing a form with the eye, is not obsessed with pleasing forms, is not repelled by unpleasing forms, and remains with body mindfulness established with immeasurable awareness. He discerns, as it has come to be, the awareness release, the discernment release, where all evil, unskillful mental qualities that have arisen utterly cease without a trace. Similarly, with ear, nose, tongue, body, and intellect. Just as if a person catching 6 animals of different ranges, of different habitats, were to bind them with a strong rope and tether them to a strong post or stake. Then those 6 animals of different ranges, of different habitats, would each pull towards its own range and habitat, and when these 6 animals became internally exhausted, they would stand, sit, or lie down right there next to the post or stake. In the same way, when a monk whose mindfulness immersed in the body is developed and pursued, the eye does not pull towards pleasing forms, and unpleasing forms are not repellent. The ear does not pull towards pleasing sounds. The nose does not pull towards pleasing smells. The tongue does not pull towards pleasing tastes. The body does not pull towards pleasing tactile sensations. The intellect does not pull towards pleasing ideas, and unpleasing ideas are not repellent. This, monks, is restraint. The strong post or stake is a term for mindfulness immersed in the body. Thus you should train yourselves. You will develop mindfulness immersed in the body. We will develop mindfulness immersed in the body. We will pursue it. Give it a means of transport. Give it a grounding. We will steady it, consolidate it, and set about it properly. This is how you should train yourselves. Section 40. Suppose, monks, that a large crowd of people comes through thronging together, saying, "The beauty queen, the beauty queen!" And suppose that the beauty queen is highly accomplished at singing and dancing, so that even even greater crowd comes thronging, saying, "The beauty queen is singing, the beauty queen is dancing." Then a man comes along, desiring life and shrinking from death, desiring pleasure and abhorring pain. They say to him, "Now look here, mister, you must take this bowl filled to the brim with oil and carry it on your head in between the great crowd and the beauty queen. A man with a raised sword will follow right behind you, and whatever you spill, even a drop of oil, right there he will cut your head off. Now, what do you think, monks? Will that man, not paying attention to the bowl of oil, let himself get distracted outside?" "No, Lord. I have given you this parable to convey a meaning. The meaning is this. The bowl filled to the brim with oil stands for mindfulness immersed in the body. Thus you should train yourselves. We will develop mindfulness immersed in the body. We will pursue it, give it a means of transport, give it a grounding. We will steady it, consolidate it, set about it properly. This is how you should train yourselves. Section 41. With mindfulness immersed in the body, well established, restrained, with respect to the 6 media of contact, always centered, the monk can know unbinding for himself. Section 42. Whoever pervades the great ocean with his awareness encompasses whatever rivulets flow down into the ocean. In the same way, whoever develops and pursues mindfulness immersed in the body encompasses whatever skillful qualities are on the side of clear knowing. When one thing is practiced and pursued, the body is calmed, the mind is calmed, thinking and evaluating are stilled, and all qualities on the side of clear knowing go to the culmination of their development. Which one thing? Mindfulness immersed in the body. When one thing is practiced and pursued, ignorance is abandoned, clear knowing arises, the conceit "I am" is abandoned, obsessions are uprooted, fetters are abandoned. Which one thing? Mindfulness immersed in the body. Thus who does not taste mindfulness of the body do not taste the deathless. Those who taste mindfulness of the body taste the deathless. Those who are heedless of mindfulness of the body are heedless of the deathless. Those who comprehend mindfulness of the body comprehend the deathless. Section 43. The deathless. There are these 4 frames of reference. Which 4? There is the case where a monk remains focused on the body in and of itself, ardent, alert, and mindful, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. As he remains focused on the body in and of itself, he abandons desire with regard to the body. He abandons desire with regard to the body. As he abandons desire with regard to the body, he realizes the deathless. He remains focused on feelings in and of themselves, mind in and of itself, mental qualities in and of themselves, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. As he remains focused on mental qualities in and of themselves, he abandons desire with regard to mental qualities. As he abandons desire with regard to mental qualities, he realizes the deathless. Section 44. It's just as if there were a great pile of dust at a 4-way intersection. If a cart or chariot came from the east, the pile of dust would be totally leveled. If a cart or chariot came from the west, from the north, from the south, the pile of dust would be totally leveled. In the same way, when a monk remains focused on the body in and of itself, then evil, unskillful qualities are totally leveled. If he remains focused on feelings, mind, mental qualities in and of themselves, then evil, unskillful qualities are totally leveled. Section 45. Now, when Venerable Anuruddha was meditating in solitude, this train of thought appeared in his awareness. Quote, "Whoever neglects the 4 frames of reference neglects the noble path going to the right ending of stress. Whoever undertakes the 4 frames of reference undertakes the noble path going to the right end of stress." Then Venerable Mahamoggallana, as soon as he perceived with his awareness the train of thought in Venerable Anuruddha's awareness, as a strong man might extend his flexed arm or flex his extended arm, appeared in front of Venerable Anuruddha and said to him, "To what extent, my friend, are the four frames of reference undertaken?" Venerable Anuruddha, quote, "There is the case, my friend, of a monk who internally remains focused on the phenomenon of origination with regard to the body, remains focused on the phenomenon of passing away with regard to the body, remains focused on the phenomenon of origination and passing away with regards to the body, ardent, alert, and mindful, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. Externally, he remains focused on the phenomenon of origination with regards to the body, ... Internally and externally, he remains focused on the phenomenon of origination with regard to the body, remains focused on the phenomenon of passing away with regard to the body, and remains focused on the phenomenon of origination of passing away, of origination and of passing away with regard to the body, ardent, alert, and mindful, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. If he wants, he remains percipient of loathsomeness in the presence of what is not loathsome. If he wants, he remains percipient of unloathsomeness in the presence of what is loathsome. If he wants, he remains percipient of loathsomeness in the presence of what is loathsome and what is not loathsome and what is. If he wants, he remains percipient of unloathsomeness in the presence of what is loathsome and what is not. If he wants, in the presence of what is loathsome and what is not, cutting himself off from both, he remains equanimous, alert, and mindful. Similarly with regard to feelings, mind, and mental qualities. To this extent, my friend, that the four frames of reference are undertaken. Section 46. It's good for a monk if, at the appropriate times, he remains percipient of loathsomeness in the presence of what is not loathsome. It is good if, at the appropriate times, he remains percipient of unloathsomeness in the presence of what is loathsome, percipient of loathsomeness in the presence of what is not loathsome, and what is percipient of unloathsomeness in the presence of what is loathsome and what is not. It is good if, at the appropriate times, in the presence of what is loathsome and what is not, cutting himself off from both, he remains equanimous, alert, and mindful. Now, with what purpose should a monk remain percipient of loathsomeness in the presence of what is not loathsome? Don't let passion arise within me in the presence of things that excite passion. With this purpose should a monk remain percipient of loathsomeness in the presence of what is not loathsome. And with what purpose should a monk remain percipient of unloathsomeness in the presence of what is loathsome? Don't let aversion arise within me in the presence of things that excite aversion. And with what purpose should a monk remain percipient of loathsomeness in the presence of what is not loathsome and what is? Don't let passion arise in me in the presence of things that excite passion, and don't let aversion arise within me in the presence of things that excite aversion. And with what purpose should a monk remain percipient of unloathsomeness in the presence of what is loathsome and what is not? Don't let aversion arise with me in the presence of things that excite aversion, and don't let passion arise within me in the presence of things that excite passion. And with what purpose should a monk, in the presence of what is loathsome and what is not, cutting himself off from both, remain equanimous, alert, and mindful? Don't let passion, in any object, in any place, in any amount, arise within me in the presence of things that excite passion. Don't let aversion in any object, in any place, in any amount, arise within me in the presence of things that excite aversion. Don't let delusion in any object, in any place, in any amount, arise within me in the presence of things that excite delusion. With this purpose should a monk, in the presence of what is loathsome and what is not, cutting himself off from both, remain equanimous, alert, and mindful. Sorry about the pronunciation. Section 47. Protecting oneself and others. Once upon a time, monks, a bamboo acrobat, having erected a bamboo pole, addressed his assistant, Frying Pan. Come here, dear Frying Pan. Climb up on that bamboo pole and stand on my shoulders. As you say, teacher, Frying Pan answered the bamboo acrobat, and, climbing on the bamboo pole, stood on his shoulders. So then the bamboo acrobat said to his assistant, "Now you watch after me, my dear frying pan, and I'll watch after you. Thus protecting one another, watching after one another, we'll show off our skill, receive our reward, and come down safely after the bamboo pole." When he had said this, Frying Pan said to him, "But that won't do at all, teacher. You watch after yourself, and I'll watch after myself, and thus, with each of us protecting ourselves, watching after ourselves, we'll show off our skill, receive our reward, and come down safely from the bamboo pole." What Frying Pan, the assistant, said to her teacher was the right way in that case. Monks, a frame of reference is to be practiced with the thought, "I'll watch after myself." A frame of reference is to be practiced with the thought, "I'll watch after others." When watching after oneself, one watches after others. When watching after others, one watches after oneself. And how does one, when watching after oneself, watch after others? Through pursuing the practice, through developing it, through devoting oneself to it. This is how when watching after oneself, watches after others. And how does one, when watching after others, watch after oneself? Through endurance, through nonviolence, and through a mind of goodwill and sympathy. This is how one, when watching after others, watches after oneself. A frame of reference is to be practiced with the thought, "I'll watch after myself." A frame of reference is to be practiced with the thought, "I'll watch after others." When watching after oneself, one watches after others. When watching after others, one watches after oneself. Section 48. Then, when the Blessed One had entered the rain's retreat, there arose a severe illness within him. Sharp and deadly were the pains, but he bore them mindfully, alert and unperturbed. The thought occurred to him, "It would not be proper for me to enter total unbinding without addressing my attendants and without taking leave of the community of monks. Why don't I, suppressing this illness with persistence, remain resolved on the fabrication of life?" So he suppressed the illness with persistence and remained resolved on the fabrication of life. His illness abated. Then he recovered from the illness. Soon after his recovery he came out of his dwelling and sat down in the shade of the building on a seat prepared for him. Then Venerable Ananda approached him, and on arrival, having bowed down to him, sat down to one side. As he was sitting there, he said to the Blessed One, "What a happy sight to see the Blessed One in comfort! What a happy sight to see the Blessed One at ease! Because of the Blessed One's sickness, and my own body felt as if it were drugged. I lost my bearings. Things were unclear to me. Yet I still took a measure of comfort in the thought that the Blessed One would not enter total unbinding as long as he hadn't given at least some pronouncement concerning the community of monks. What more does the community of monks want from me, Ananda? I have taught the Dharma without an inner or an outer version. The Tathagata has no closed fist with regard to teachings. Whoever has a thought, "I will rule the community of monks," or "the community of monks is dedicated to me," he should give some pronouncement concerning the community of monks. But the Tathagata has no such thoughts, so why should he give some pronouncement concerning the community of monks? I'm old now, Ananda, and aged. My years have turned 80. Just as an old cart is kept going with the help of bamboo strips, it seems to me as if the Tathagata's body is kept going with the help of bamboo strips. The only time the Tathagata's body feels at ease is when not attending to any theme at all, and with the cessation of certain feelings, he enters and returns in the themeless concentration of awareness. Therefore, each of you should remain with yourself as an island, yourself as your refuge, without anything else as a refuge. Remain with the Dharma as an island, the Dharma as your refuge, without anything else as a refuge. And how does a monk remain with himself, an island, hisself as a refuge, without anything else as a refuge? How does he remain with the Dharma as an island, with the Dharma as his refuge, without anything else as refuge? There is the case where a monk remains focused on the mind in and of itself, ardent, alert, and mindful. Putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world, he remains focused on feelings, mind, mental qualities in and of themselves, ardent, alert, and mindful. Putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. This is how a monk remains with his self as an island, his self as a refuge, without anything else as a refuge, with the Dharma as an island, the Dharma as a refuge, without anything else as refuge. For those who, now or after I am gone, remain with their self as an island, the Dharma as their refuge, without anything else as a refuge, they will be the highest of the monks who desire training. C. The 4 right exertions. The 4 activities included in this set show how effort can be applied to developing skillful qualities in the mind. The basic formula runs as follows. There is the case where a monk generating desire endeavors, arouses persistence, upholds, and exerts his intent for the sake of the non-arising of evil and skillful qualities that have not yet arisen, for the sake of abandoning of evil and skillful qualities that have arisen, for the sake of the arising of skillful qualities that have not yet arisen, and for the maintenance, non-confusion, increase, plenitude, development, and culmination of skillful qualities that have arisen. These 4 aspects of effort are also termed guarding, abandoning, developing, and maintaining. All 4 play a necessary role in bringing the mind to awakening, although in some cases they are simply 4 sides of a single process. The abandoning of unskillful mental qualities can frequently be accompanied simply by focusing on the development of skillful ones, such as mindfulness. The same principle can also act in reverse. In the skillful eradication of unskillful qualities, the skillfulness of the eradication is in and of itself the development of mindful discernment. As we will see when we deal with the 7 factors for awakening, the act of nourishing a factor for awakening can in some cases simultaneously starve a hindrance, while the conscious starving of a hindrance can foster a factor of awakening. Ultimately, though, right exertion requires more than simply abstaining from what is unskillful, for it must apply to basic factors of skillfulness, mindfulness, and discernment, to gain an understanding of how even skillfulness can be transcended. Perhaps the most surprising element in right exertion is the role played by desire, which is usually associated with the craving that acts as the cause for suffering. We will treat this topic in more detail under the basis for success, and simply note here that the Buddha, recognizing that desire can either be skillful or unskillful, and that he freely admitted that skillful desire is a necessary factor in the path to the end of suffering and stress. The most important point in developing right exertion is to realize that the effort to abandon unskillful qualities and to develop skillful qualities must be skillful itself. Unskillful efforts at eradicating unskillful states, even if well-intended, can often exacerbate problems instead of solving them. Treating hatred with hatred, for instance, is less effective than treating it with the kind of understanding developed in the second stage of frames of reference meditation, which sees into causes and effects and learns how to manipulate causes properly so as to get the desired effects. For this reason, the basic formula for right exertion includes both implicitly and explicitly other factors of the path to ensure that the effort is skillfully applied. 3 of the qualities that activate the mind in these exertions, desire, persistence, and intent, are also members of the base power, where they function as dominant factors in the attainment of concentration. The ability to discriminate between skillful and unskillful qualities, implicit in all of these exertions, requires a certain level of mindfulness and discernment. The skillful qualities that are mentioned most prominently as worthy of development are the 7 factors for awakening, which include mindfulness, analysis of mental qualities, the factors of jhana, all of which must be reinvested in the process of right exertion to bring to higher levels of finesse. Passage section 51 gives an idea of right exertion's range of application by listing 7 ways in which unskillful qualities can be abandoned: seeing, restraining, using, tolerating, avoiding, destroying, and developing. The passage is deliberately vague as to which type of unskillful quality respond to which type of treatment, for this is a point that each meditator must discover in practice for herself or himself. The emphasis on personal exploration is crucial to the practice of right effort. for it encourages one to be sensitive to what can be discovered with one's own mindfulness and discernment. The same point applies to the question of how much effort must be applied to the practice. The Buddha notes that some meditators will have to undergo painful and slow practice, while others will find that their practice is painful and quick, and pleasant and slow, or pleasant and quick. Thus each has to adjust the effort applied to the practice accordingly. This need for differing levels of effort depends not only on the individual but also on the situation. In some cases, simply watching an unskillful quality with equanimity will be enough to make it go away. In other cases, one has to exert conscious effort to get rid of it. Thus, through observation, one will realize that skillful effort has no room for doctrinal approaches. The polar extremes of constant exertion to the point of exhaustion and its opposite, a knee-jerk fear of efforting, quote-unquote efforting, are both misjudged here, as is the seemingly middle way of moderation in all things. The true middle way means turning one's efforts to one's abilities and to the task at hand. In some cases, this entails an all-out effort, in others, simple watchfulness. The ability to sense what kind and what level of effort is appropriate in any given situation is an important element in developing the basic requirements for skill, mindfulness, and discernment, by putting them to use. We have already noted that right exertion is equivalent to the factor of ardency in frames of reference meditation. In the first stage of that practice, right exertion functions by keeping the mind with its frame of reference and by warding off unskillful mental qualities that would make it abandon that frame. In the second stage, the function of exertion becomes more refined, wandering off the tendency to get involved with what is arising and passing away, and keeping the mind applied to its task of manipulating, observing, and mastering the process bolded, of origination and passing away as one steers the mind to the stillness of jhana. In the third stage, the function of exertion becomes finer yet, as it maintains the basic quote-unquote empty or radically phenomenological awareness of the frame of reference in order to bring the mind to the state of non-fashioning appropriate to the process of awakening. The equipoise of this state, beyond the categories of effort and non-effort, remains a paradox expressed in section 62, which states that the mind crosses the flood of rebirth by neither pushing forward nor staying in place, an equipoise that embodies the ultimate skillfulness of right exertion in bringing the mind to a point beyond still. Implicit in this discussion of the effort involved in mastering skill to the point of its own transcendence is the fact that the goal of the practice is not an effort to return to a supposedly pure state of childlike awareness prior to social conditionings. Passage 6, section 61, makes this fact explicit. According to Buddhist analysis, the state of a child's mind is one, not of purity, but of ignorance, filled with the potential for many unskillful qualities. These attributes show themselves in seemingly innocent ways simply because the infant's intellect and physical powers are weak. Once those powers are strengthened, the mind's potentials become manifest. As one modern teacher has stated, the childlike mind is a source for the round of rebirth. If it were truly pure and fully aware, it would not be susceptible to unskillful social conditioning. Thus the way to purity lies not in renouncing one's developed intellectual powers, but in developing those powers to higher levels of mastery and skill. This explains why right exertion is a necessary part of the practice. Passages from the Pali Canon. Section 49. There are these 4 right exertions. Which 4? There is the case where a monk generates desire, endeavors, arouses persistence, upholds and exerts his intent for the sake of the non-arising of evil, unskillful qualities which have not yet arisen, for the sake of abandoning evil, unskillful qualities that have arisen, for the sake of arising of skillful qualities that have not yet arisen, and for the maintenance, non-confusion, increased plenitude, development, and culmination of skillful qualities that have arisen. These are the 4 right exertions. Just as the river Ganges flows to the east, slopes to the east, inclines to the east, in the same way, when a monk develops and pursues the four right exertions, he flows to unbinding, slopes to unbinding, inclines to unbinding. Section 50. There are these four exertions. Which four? The exertion to guard, the exertion to abandon, the exertion to develop, and the exertion to maintain. And what is the exertion to guard? There is the case where a monk, on seeing a form with the eye, does not grasp at any theme or variation by which, if he were to dwell without restraint over the faculty of the eye, evil, unskilful qualities, such as greed or distress, might assail him. He practices with restraint. He guards the faculty of the eye. He achieves restraint with regard to the faculty of the eye. Similarly, with the ear, nose, tongue, body, and intellect. This is called the exertion to guard. And what is the exertion to abandon? There is the case where a monk does not acquiesce to a thought of sensuality that has arisen in him. He abandons it, destroys it, dispels it, wipes it out of existence. He does not acquiesce to a thought of ill will, a thought of violence, any evil, unskillful qualities that have arisen in him. He abandons them, destroys them, dispels them. He wipes them out of existence. This is called the exertion to abandon. And what is the exertion to develop? There is the case where a monk develops mindfulness as a factor for awakening dependent on seclusion, dispassion, cessation, resulting in letting go. He develops investigation of qualities, persistence, rapture, serenity, concentration, equanimity, as factor for awakening, dependent on seclusion, dispassion, cessation, resulting in letting go. This is called the exertion to develop. And what is the exertion to maintain? There is the case where a monk maintains a favorable theme of concentration. The skeleton perception, the worm-eaten perception, the livid perception, the festering perception, the falling apart perception, the bloated perception. This is called the exertion to maintain. These are the four exertions: guarding and abandoning, developing and maintaining. These four exertions taught by the kinsman of the sun, the Buddha. A monk who strives ardently at them reaches the ending of stress. Section 51. The ending of the affluence is for one who knows and sees, I tell you, not for one who does not know and does not see. For one who knows what and sees what. Appropriate attention and inappropriate attention. When a monk attends inappropriately, unrisen affluence arise and arisen affluence increase. When a monk attends appropriately, unrisen affluence do not arise, and arisen affluence are abandoned. These are affluents that are to be abandoned by seeing, those that are to be abandoned by restraining, those are to be abandoned by using, those that are to be abandoned by tolerating, those that are to be abandoned by avoiding, those that are to be abandoned by destroying, those are to be abandoned by developing. And what are the affluents that are to be abandoned by seeing? There is the case where an uninstructed, run-of-the-mill person doesn't discern what ideas are fit for attention or what ideas are unfit for attention. This being so, he doesn't attend to ideas fit for attention and attends instead to ideas unfit for attention. And what are the ideas unfit for attention that he attends to? Whatever ideas, such that, when he attends to them, the unrisen affluent of sensuality arises. The arisen affluent of sensuality increases. The unarisen affluent of becoming, the unarisen affluent of ignorance arises, and the arisen affluent of ignorance increases. This is how he attends inappropriately. Was I in the past? Was I not in the present? What was I in the past? How was I in the past? Having been what? What was I in the past? Shall I be in the future? Shall I not be in the future? What shall I be in the future? How shall I be in the future? Having been what? What shall I be in the future? And else he is inwardly perplexed about the immediate present. Am I? Am I not? What am I? How am I? Where has this being come from? Where is it bound? As he attends inappropriately in this way, one of 6 kinds of view arises in him. The view, I have a self, arises in him as true and established, or the view, I have no self, or the view, it is precisely by means of self that I perceive self, or the view, it is precisely by means of self that I perceive not self, or the view, it is precisely by means of not self that I perceive self, arises in him as true and established, or he has a view like this one. This very self of mine, the knower that is sensitive here and now to the ripening of good and bad actions, is the self of mine that is constant, everlasting, eternal, not subject to change, and will endure as long as eternity. This is called the thicket of views, a wilderness of views, a contortion of views, a withering of views, a fetter of views. Bound by a fetter of views, the uninstructed run-of-the-mill person is not freed from birth and aging and death, from sorrow, lamentation, pain, distress, and despair. He is not freed, I tell you, from stress. The well-taught disciple of the noble ones discerns what ideas are fit for attention and what ideas are unfit for attention. This being so, he doesn't attend to ideas unfit for attention and attends instead to ideas fit for attention. And what are the ideas fit for attention that he attends to? Well, whatever ideas such that, when he attends to them, the unarisen affluent of sensuality doesn't arise, the arisen affluent of sensuality is abandoned, the unarisen affluent of becoming, the unarisen affluent of ignorance doesn't arise, and the arisen affluent of ignorance is abandoned. He attends appropriately. This is stress. This is the origination of stress. This is the cessation of stress. This is the way leading to the cessation of stress. As he attends appropriately in this way, 3 fetters are abandoned in him: identity view, doubt, and grasping at habits and practices. These are called the affluents that are to be abandoned by seeing. And what are the affluents that are to be abandoned by restraining? There is the case where a monk reflecting appropriately dwells restrained with the restraint of the eye faculty. The affluence, vexation, or fever that would arise if he were to dwell unrestrained with the restraint of the eye faculty do not arise for him when he dwells restrained with the restraint of the eye faculty. Similarly with the ear, nose, tongue, body, and intellect faculties. These are called the affluents that are to be abandoned by restraining. And what are the affluents that are to be abandoned by using? There is the case where a monk reflecting appropriately uses the robe simply to counteract cold, to counteract heat, to counteract the touch of flies, mosquitoes and wind, sun and reptiles, simply for the purpose of covering the parts of the body that cause shame. Reflecting appropriately, he uses alms food, not playfully, not for intoxication, not for putting on bulk, not for beautification, but simply for the survival and containment of the continuance of the body, for ending its afflictions, for the support of the holy life, thinking, thus I will destroy old feelings of hunger, and not create new feelings from overeating. I will maintain myself, be blameless, and live in comfort. Reflecting appropriately, he uses logic simply to counteract cold, to counteract heat, to counteract the touch of flies, mosquitoes, wind, sun, and reptiles, and simply for protection from the inclements of weather and for the enjoyment of seclusion. Reflecting appropriately, he uses medicinal requisites for curing illness simply to counteract any pains of illness that have arisen, and for maximum freedom from disease. The affluents, vexation or fever that would arise if he were not to use these things in this way, do not arise in him, for when he uses them in this way, these are called the affluents that are to be abandoned by using. And what are the affluents that are to be abandoned by tolerating? There is a case where a monk reflecting appropriately endures. He tolerates cold, heat, hunger, and thirst. the touch of flies, mosquitoes, wind, sun, reptiles, ill-spoken, unwelcome words, bodily feelings that, when they arise, are painful, racking, sharp, piercing, disagreeable, displeasing, and menacing to life. The affluence, vexation, or fever that would arise if we were not to tolerate these things, do not arise for him when he tolerates them. These are called the affluents that are to be abandoned by tolerating. And what are the affluents that are to be abandoned by avoiding? There is the case where a monk, reflecting appropriately, avoids a wild elephant, a wild horse, a wild bull, a wild dog, a snake, a stump, a bramble patch, a chasm, a cliff, a cesspool, an open sewer. Reflecting appropriately, he avoids sitting in the sorts of unsuitable seats, wandering to the sorts of unsuitable habitats, and associating with the sorts of bad friends that would make his knowledgeable friends in the holy life suspect him of evil conduct. The affluence, vexation, or fever that would arise if he were not to avoid these things do not arise for him when he avoids them. These are called the affluents that are to be abandoned by avoiding. And what are the affluents that are to be abandoned by destroying? There is the case where a monk, reflecting appropriately, does not tolerate an unrisen thought of sensuality. He abandons it, destroys it, dispels it, wipes it out of existence. Similarly, with thoughts of ill will, thoughts of violence and evil, unskillful mental qualities. The affluence, vexation, or fever that would arise if he were not to destroy these things do not arise for him when he destroys them. They are called the affluents that are abandoned by destroying. And what are the affluents that are to be abandoned by developing? There is the case where a monk, reflecting appropriately, develops mindfulness as a factor for awakening dependent on seclusion, dispassion, cessation, resulting in letting go. He develops analysis of qualities as a factor for awakening, persistence as a factor for awakening, rapture as a factor for awakening, serenity as a factor for awakening, concentration as a factor for awakening, equanimity as a factor for awakening, dependent on seclusion, dispassion, cessation, resulting in letting go. The affluence, vexation, or fever that would arise if he were not to develop these qualities do not arise for him when he develops them. These are called the affluents that are to be abandoned by developing. When a monk's affluents that should be abandoned by seeing have been abandoned by seeing, his affluents that should be abandoned by restraining have been abandoned by restraining. His affluents that should be abandoned by using have been abandoned by using. His affluents that should be abandoned by tolerating have been abandoned by tolerating. His affluents that should be abandoned by avoiding have been abandoned by avoiding. His affluents that should be abandoned by destroying have been abandoned by destroying. His affluents that should be abandoned by developing have been abandoned by developing. Then he is called a monk who dwells restrained with restraint of all the affluents. He has severed craving, thrown off the fetters, and, through the right penetration of conceit, has made an end of suffering and stress. Section 52. These are the 5 factors for exertion. Which 5? 1. There is the case where a monk has conviction, is convicted of the Tatayaga's awakening. Indeed, the Blessed One is worthy and rightly self-awakened, consummate in knowledge and conduct, well gone and expert with regard to the world, unexcelled as a trainer for those people fit to be tamed, the teacher of divine and human beings, awakened, blessed. 2. The monk is free from illness and discomfort, endowed with good digestion, not too cold, not too hot, of moderate strength, fit for exertion. 3. He is neither fraudulent nor deceitful. He declares himself to the teacher or to his wise friend in the holy life, in line with what he actually is. 4. He keeps his persistence aroused for abandoning unskillful mental qualities and taking on skillful mental qualities. He is steadfast, solid in his effort, not shirking his duties with regard to skillful mental qualities. 5. He is discerning, endowed with discernment, leading to the arising of the goal, noble, penetrating, leading to the right ending of stress. These are the 5 factors for exertion. Section 53. With regard to internal factors, I do not envision any other single factor like appropriate attention as being so helpful for a monk in training, who has not attained the heart's goal, but remains intent on the unexcelled security from bondage. A monk who attends appropriately abandons what is unskillful and develops what is skillful. Appropriate attention as a quality of a monk in training. Nothing else does do much for attaining the superlative goal. A monk, striving appropriately, reaches the ending of suffering and stress. Section 54. With regard to external factors, I do not envision any other single factor like admirable friendship as being so helpful for a monk in training who has not attained the goal, but remains intent on the unexcelled security from bondage. A monk who is a friend with admirable people abandons what is unskillful and develops what is skillful. A monk with admirable people as friends, who's reverential, respectful, doing what his friends advise, mindful, alert, attains step by step the ending of all fetters. Section 55. A person without ardency, without compunction, is incapable of self-awakening, incapable of unbinding, incapable of attaining unexcelled security from bondage. A person ardent and compunctious is capable of self-awakening, capable of unbinding, capable of attaining the unexcelled security from bondage. Without ardency, without compulsion, lazy with low persistence, full of sloth and drowsiness, shameless, without respect, he is incapable, a monk like this, of touching superlative self-awakening. He's incapable, a monk like this, of touching superlative self-awakening. But whoever is mindful, masterful, absorbed in jhana, ardent, compunctuous and heedful, cutting the fetter of birth and aging, touches right here and now a self-awakening unsurpassed. Section 56. Venerable Sariputta. It is said, friend, this is what he says, it is said, friend, that a person without ardency, without compunction, is incapable of self-awakening, incapable of unbinding, incapable of attaining the unexcelled security from bondage. Now, how is a person without ardency, without compunction, incapable of self-awakening, incapable of unbinding, incapable of attaining the incapable of attending the unexcelled security from bondage? And how is a person ardent and compunctious, capable of self-awakening, capable of unbinding, capable of attaining the unexcelled security from bondage? Venerable Maha Kassapa, this is what he says. There is a case, friend, where a monk, thinking, unarisen evil, unskillful qualities arisen in me would lead to what is unbeneficial, arouses no ardency, thinking, arisen evil, unskillful qualities not being abandoned in me, unarisen skillful qualities not arising in me, arisen skillful qualities ceasing in me would lead to what is unbeneficial. He arouses no ardency. This is how one is without ardency. And how is one without compunction? There is the case where a monk thinking, unarisen evil, unskillful qualities arising in me would lead to what is unbeneficial. Feels no compunction, thinking, arisen evil, unskillful qualities not being abandoned in me, unarisen unskillful qualities not arising in me, arisen skillful qualities ceasing in me would lead to what is unbeneficial. He feels no compunction. This is how one is without compunction. This is how a person without ardency, without compunction, is incapable of self-awakening, incapable of unbinding, incapable of attaining the unexcelled security from bondage. And how is one ardent? There is a case where a monk thinking, unarisen evil, unskillful qualities arising in me would lead to what is unbeneficial, arouses ardency, thinking, arisen evil, unskillful qualities not being abandoned in me, unarisen skillful qualities not arising in me, arisen skillful qualities ceasing in me would lead to what is unbeneficial. He avows ardency. This is how one is ardent. And how is one compunctuous? There is a case where a monk thinking, unarisen evil, unskillful qualities arising in me would lead to what is unbeneficial. Feels compunction, therefore, thinking, arisen evil, unskillful qualities not being abandoned in me, and unarisen skillful qualities not arising in me, and arisen skillful qualities ceasing in me would lead to what is unbeneficial, and he feels compunction. And this is how one feels compunction. Someone is compunctious. This is how a person ardent and compunctious is capable of self-awakening, capable of unbinding, capable of attaining the unexcelled security from bondage. Section 57. Venerable Sariputta says, imagine a bronze bowl brought back from a shop or a smith all covered with dust and dirt, and that the owners would neither use nor clean, but would throw away in the dust. Wouldn't that bronze bowl eventually become even more dirty and defiled with time? Venerable Mahamaggalina says, yes, my friend. And Venerable Sariputta says, in the same way, when an individual, being blemished, doesn't discern as it comes to be that I have an internal blemish, it can be expected of him that he will not generate desire, endeavor, or arouse persistence for the abandonment of that blemish. He will die with passion, aversion, delusion, blemished, and with a mind defiled. Now, imagine a bronze bowl brought from a shop or a smith all covered with dust and dirt, that the owners would both use and clean, and would not be thrown away into the dust. Wouldn't that bronze bowl eventually become clean and pure with time? Venerable Mahamaggalina says, yes, my friend. And Venerable Sariputta says, in the same way, when an individual being blemished discerns it has come to be that I have an internal blemish, it can be expected of him that he will generate desire, endeavor, and arouse persistence for the abandoning of that blemish. He will die without passion, aversion, delusion, unblemished, and with a mind undefiled. Now imagine a bronze bowl brought back from a shop or a smith, all clean and pure, which the owners would neither use nor clean, but would throw away in the dust. Wouldn't that bronze bowl eventually become dirty and defiled with time? Venerable Mahamaggalina says, yes, my friend. And Venerable Sariputta says, in the same way, when an individual, being unblemished, doesn't discern as it comes that I have no internal blemish, it can be expected of him that he will attend to the theme of beauty. As he attends to the theme of beauty, passion will assault his mind, and he will die with passion, aversion, delusion, blemished, and with a mind defiled. Now, imagine a bowl brought back from a shop or smith, all clean and pure, with the owners both use and clean, and would not throw away in the dust. Wouldn't that bronze bowl eventually become even more clean and pure with time? Venerable Mahamaggalina, yes, my friend. Venerable Sariputta says, in the same way, when an individual, being unblemished, discerns as it has come to be that I have no internal blemish, it can be expected of him that he will not attend to the theme of beauty. And he does not attend to the theme of beauty, passion will not assault his mind, he will die without passion, with aversion, delusion, unblemished, and a mind undefiled. This is the reason, and this is the cause why, of the two individuals who are blemished, one, the first, is reckoned to be inferior, the other superior, and why, of the two individuals who are unblemished, one, the first, is reckoned to be inferior, the other superior. A Venerable Mahamaggalina says, blemish, blemish, it is said. What does blemish stand for? Venerable Sariputta. The influences of evil, unskillful wishes. That's what blemish stands for. Section 58. Even if a monk is not skillful in the ways of the minds of others, not skilled in reading the minds of others, he should train himself. I will be skilled in reading my own mind. And how is a monk skilled in reading his own mind? Imagine a young woman or man fond of adornment, examining the image of her own face in a bright, clean mirror or a bowl of clear water. If she saw any dirt or blemish there, she would try to remove it. If she saw no dirt or blemish there, she would be pleased, her resolve fulfilled. How fortunate I am, how clean I am. In the same way, a monk's self-examination is very productive in terms of skillful qualities if he conducts it in this way. Do I usually remain covetous or not? What thoughts of ill will or not? With thoughts of ill will or not? Overcome by sloth and drowsiness or not? Restless or not? Uncertain or gone beyond uncertainty? Angry or not? With soiled thoughts or unsoiled thoughts? With my body aroused or unaroused? Lazy or with persistent arousal. Unconcentrated or concentrated. If on examination a monk knows, I usually remain covetous with thoughts of ill will, overcome by sloth and drowsiness, restlessness, uncertainty, angry with soiled thoughts, with my body aroused, lazy and unconcentrated. Then he should put forth extra desire, effort, diligence, relentlessness, mindfulness, and alertness for the abandoning of those very same evil, unskilful qualities, just as when a person whose turban or head was on fire would put forth extra desire, effort, diligence, endeavor, relentlessness, mindfulness, and alertness to put out the fire on his turban or head. But if an examination a monk knows, I usually remain uncovetous, without thoughts of ill will, concentrated. Then his duty is to make an effort in establishing or tuning those very same skillful qualities to a higher degree for the ending of the affluence. Section 59. And how is striving fruitful? How is exertion fruitful? There is the case where a monk, when not loaded down, does not load himself down with pain, nor does he reject pleasure that accords with the Dhamma, although he is not infatuated with that pleasure. He discerns, when I exert a bodily, verbal, or mental fabrication against this cause of stress, then from the fabrication of exertion there is dispassion fading away. When I look on with equanimity at the cause of stress, then from the development of equanimity there is dispassion. So he exerts a fabrication against the first cause of stress and develops equanimity with regard to the second cause of stress, and thus the stress coming from the first cause is exhausted, and the stress coming from the second cause is exhausted. Suppose that a man is in love with a woman, his mind ensnared with intense desire and intense passion. He sees her standing with another man, chatting, joking, and laughing. What do you think, monks? Would sorrow, lamentation, pain, distress, despair, and distress arise in him? Ah, yes, Lord. Now suppose the thought were to occur to him, I am in love with this woman. When I see her standing with another man, chatting, joking, and laughing, sorrow, lamentation, pain, distress, and despair arise in me. Why don't I abandon my desire and passion for that woman? So he abandons his passion and desire for the woman, and afterwards sees her standing with another man, chatting, joking, laughing. What do you think, monks? Would sorrow, lamentation, pain, distress, and despair arise in him? No, Lord. In the same way, the monk, when not loaded down, does not load himself down with pain, nor does he reject pleasure that accords with the Dhamma, although he is not infatuated with that pleasure. He exerts a fabrication against the first cause of stress and develops equanimity with regards to the second cause of stress. Thus, the stress coming from the first cause is exhausted, and the stress coming from the second cause is exhausted. Furthermore, the monk notices this. When I live according to my pleasure, unskillful mental qualities increase in me, and skillful mental qualities decline. When I exert myself with stress and pain, though, unskillful qualities decline in me, and skillful qualities increase. Why don't I exert myself with stress and pain? So he exerts himself with stress and pain, and while he is exerting himself with stress and pain, unskillful qualities decline in him, and skillful qualities increase. Then, at a later time, he would no longer exert himself with stress and pain. Why is that? Because he has attained the goal for which he has exerted himself with stress and pain. Suppose that a fetter were to heat and warm an arrow shaft between two flames. Suppose that a Fletcher were to heat and warm an arrow shaft between two flames, making it straight and pliable. Then, at a later time, he would no longer heat and warm the shaft between the two flames, making it straight and pliable. Why is that? Because he has attained the goal for which he was heating and warming the shaft. In the same way, the monk no longer exerts himself with stress and pain. Why is that? Because he has attained the goal for which he is exerting himself with stress and pain. Section 60. Udayan. There are these 4 types of people to be found existing in the world. Which 4? There is the case where a certain person is practicing for the abandoning and relinquishing of acquisitions. As he is practicing for the abandoning and relinquishing of acquisitions, memories and resolves associated with acquisitions assail him. He tolerates them. He does not abandon them, destroy them, dispel them, or wipe them out of existence. I tell you, Udayan, that is the sort of person that this sort of person is associated, not disassociated. Why is that? Because I have known the diversity of faculties with regard to this type of person. Again, there is the case where a certain person practicing for the abandonment and relinquishing of acquisitions is assailed by memories and resolves associated with acquisitions. He does not tolerate them. He abandons them, destroys them, dispels them, and wipes them out of existence. I tell you, Udayan, that this sort of person is associated, not disassociated. Why is that? Because I have known the diversity of faculties with regard to this type of person. Again, there is the case where a certain person is practicing for the abandonment and relinquishing of acquisitions. Owing to lapse in mindfulness from time to time, he is assailed by memories and resolves associated with acquisitions. Slow is the arising with mindfulness, but then he quickly abandons those memories and resolves, destroys them, dispels them, and wipes them out of existence, just as when 2 or 3 drops of water fall onto the iron pan heated all day. Slow is the falling of the drops of water, but they quickly vanish and disappear. In the same way, slow is the arising of his mindfulness, but then he quickly abandons those memories and resolves, destroys them, dispels them, and wipes them out of existence. I tell you, Adayan, that this sort of person is associated, not disassociated. Why is that? Because I have known the diversity of faculties with regard to this type of person. Again, there is the case where a certain person, realizing that acquisitions are the root of suffering and stress, is without acquisitions, released in the ending of acquisitions. I tell you, Aiden, that this sort of person is disassociated, not associated. Why is that? Because I have known the diversity of faculties with regard to this type of person. Section 61. Then Pankatagat Tanga, the carpenter, went to Ugadhamana, the follower of Mundika, the contemplative, or the shaven contemplative, a Jain, was staying and, on arrival, greeted him courteously. After an exchange of friendly greetings and courtesies, he sat to one side. As he was sitting there, Ugahamana said to him, I describe an individual endowed with 4 qualities of being consummate in what is skillful, foremost in what is skillful, as an invincible contemplative attained to the highest attainments. Which 4? There is the case where he does no evil action with his body, speaks no evil speech, resolves no evil resolve, and maintains himself with no evil means of livelihood. An individual endowed with these 4 qualities I describe as being consummate in what is skillful, an invincible contemplative attained to the highest attainments. Then Pankatanga, the carpenter, neither delighted in Ugad Haman's words, nor did he scorn them. Expressing neither delight nor scorn, he got up from his seat and left, thinking, I will learn the meaning of this statement in the presence of the Blessed One. Then the carpenter went to where the Blessed One was staying, and on arrival, after bowing down to him, sat down on one side. As he was sitting there, he told the Blessed One the entire conversation he had with Ugahamana. When this was said, the Blessed One addressed Pankatanga, saying, In that case, then, according to Ugahamana's words, a stupid baby boy, lying on its back, is consummate in what is skillful, foremost in what is skillful, an invincible contemplative, attained to the highest attainments. For even the thought, body, does not occur to a stupid baby boy lying on its back. So from where would it do any evil action with its body, aside from a little kicking? Even the thought speech does not occur to it, so where would it speak any evil speech, aside from a little crying? Even the thought resolve does not occur to it, so where would it resolve on any resolve, aside from a little bad temper? Even the thought livelihood does not occur to it, so that where would it maintain itself any evil means of livelihood, aside from its mother's milk? So according to Ugahamanya's words, a stupid baby boy, lying on its back, is an invincible contemplative attained to the highest attainments. If an individual is endowed with these 4 qualities, I do not describe him as an invincible contemplative attained to the highest attainments. Rather, he is at the same level as a stupid baby boy lying on its back. An individual endowed with 10 qualities is one who I describe as being consummate in what is skillful, foremost in what is skillful, and invincible contemplative, attained to the highest attainments. With regard to that point, one should know that these are skillful habits, I say. With regard to that point, one should say that this is the cause of unskillful habits. Here unskillful habits cease without trace. This sort of practice is the practice leading to the cessation of unskillful habits, I say. With regard to that point, one should know that these are skillful habits. There is the cause of skillful habits. Here the skillful habits cease without trace. This sort of practice is the practice leading to the cessation of skillful habits, I say. With regard to that point, one should know that there are unskillful resolves. This is the cause of unskillful resolves. Here unskillful resolves cease without trace. This sort of practice is the practice leading to the cessation of unskillful resolves, I say. With regard to the point, one should know that these are skillful resolves. This is the cause of skillful resolves. Here skillful resolves cease without trace. This sort of practice is a practice leading to cessation of skillful resolves, I say. Now, what are unskillful habits? Unskillful bodily actions, unskillful verbal actions, evil means of livelihood. What is the cause of unskillful habits? They are said to be mind-caused. Which mind? For the mind has many modes and permutations. Any mind with passion, aversion, or delusion. This is the cause of unskillful habits. Now, where do unskillful habits cease without trace? There is the case where a monk abandons wrong bodily conduct and develops right bodily conduct, abandons wrong verbal conduct and develops right verbal conduct, abandons wrong livelihood and maintains his life with right livelihood. This is where unskillful habits cease without trace. And what sort of practice is the practice leading to the cessation of unskillful habits? This is the case where a monk generates desire, endeavors, arouses persistence, upholds and exerts his intent for the sake of non-arising of evil, unskillful qualities that have not yet arisen, for the sake of the abandoning of evil, unskillful qualities that have arisen, for the sake of arising of skillful qualities that have not yet arisen, and for the maintenance, non-confusion, increase, plenitude, development, and culmination of skillful qualities that have arisen. This sort of practice is the practice leading to the cessation of unskillful habits. And what are skillful habits? Skillful bodily actions, skillful verbal actions, purity of livelihood. What is the cause of skillful habits? They are said to be mind-caused. Which mind? For the mind has many modes and permutations. Any mind without passion, without aversion, without delusion. That is the cause of skillful habits. Now, where do skillful habits cease without trace? There is the case where a monk is virtuous but not fashioned to virtue. He discerns, as it comes to be, the awareness release and discernment release, where his skillful habits cease without trace. And what sort of practice is the practice leading to cessation of skillful habits? There is the case where a monk generates desire for the sake of non-arising of evil, unskillful qualities that have not yet arisen, for the sake of abandoning of evil, unskillful qualities that have arisen, for the sake of the arising of skillful qualities that have not yet arisen, and for the development of culmination of skillful qualities that have arisen. This sort of practice is the practice leading to the cessation of skillful habits. And what are unskillful resolves? Being resolved on sensuality, on ill will, on violence. What is the cause of unskillful resolves? They are said to be perception caused. Which perception? For perception has many modes and permutations. Any sensuality perception, ill will perception, or violence perception. That is the cause of unskillful resolves. Now, where do unskillful resolves cease without a trace? There is a case where a monk, quite secluded from sensuality, secluded from unskillful qualities, enters and maintains in the first jhana rapture and pleasure born of seclusion, accompanied by directing thought and evaluation. This is where unskillful resolves cease without trace. And what sort of practice is the practice leading to the cessation of unskillful resolves? There is a case where a monk generates desire for the sake of non-arising of evil, unskillful qualities that have not yet arisen, for the sake of abandoning of evil, unskillful qualities that have arisen, and for the sake of arising of skillful qualities that have not yet arisen, and for the development and culmination of skillful qualities that have arisen. That sort of practice is the practice leading to the cessation of unskillful resolve. And what are the skillful resolves? being resolved on renunciation, freedom from sensuality, on non-ill will, on non-violence. What is the cause of skillful resolves? They are said to be perception caused. Which perception? For perception has many modes and permutations. Any renunciation perception, non-ill will perception, non-violence perception. This is the cause of skillful resolves. Now where do skillful resolves cease without trace? There is the case where a monk, with a settling of directed thoughts and evaluation, enters and remains in the second jhana, rapture and pleasure, both of concentration, unification of awareness, free from distracted thought and evaluation, internal assurance. This is where skillful resolve ceases without trace. And what sort of practice is a practice leading to the cessation of skillful resolve? There is the case where a monk generates desire for the sake of non-arising of evil, unskillful qualities that have not yet arisen for the sake of the abandonment of evil, unskillful qualities that have arisen for the sake of the arising of skillful qualities that have not yet arisen, and for the development and culmination of skillful qualities that have arisen. This sort of practice is the practice leading to the cessation of skillful resolves. Now, an individual endowed with which 10 qualities is one whom I describe as being consummate in what is skillful, foremost in what he is skillful, an invincible contemplative, attained to the highest attainments, one endowed with right view of an adept or arahat, the right resolve and adept, the right speech, the right action, the right livelihood, the right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration, right knowledge, right release of the adept. An individual endowed with these 10 qualities I describe as being consummate in what is skillful, foremost in what is skillful, an invincible contemplative, attained to the highest attainments. This is what the Blessed One said, glad at heart. Pankatarika, the carpenter, delighted in the Blessed One's words. His words, section 62. O Diva, tell me, dear sir, how you crossed over the flood. The Buddha. I crossed over the flood without pushing forward, without staying in place. The Diva. But how did you cross over the flood without pushing forward, without staying in place? The Buddha. When I pushed forward, I was whirled about. When I stayed in place, I sank. And so I crossed over the flood without pushing forward, without staying in place. The Diva. At long last I see a Brahman totally unbound, who, without pushing forward, without staying in place, has crossed over the entanglements of the world.